Before this story begins, ask yourself one very small question. Small as a silver scratch along the edge of a razor, yet cold enough to touch the marrow. If someone paid you more than your rent just to open 5 photographs in the middle of the night, 5 photographs so dark they looked like pits filled with asphalt, would you open them? Most people would. So did Evan. He was a photo editor, the kind of person who made a living by dragging broken details out of the flesh of an image and stitching them back together until they pleased whoever was paying. He fixed overexposed pictures, softened exhausted faces, erased things no one wanted to remember. A black car at the edge of an accident scene, a bruise in the wrong place. A person who had once stood inside someone else's life, but now needed to vanish cleanly, as though they had never been there at all. At 2:03 in the morning, Evan Cole accepted a job that should not have existed. 5 dark frames, an impossible timestamp, a faceless client, and something standing inside the blackness that came a little closer every time he raised the exposure, like a black python that did not need to slither to coil itself slowly around the viewer's throat. This is the story of the blind spot in the frame. At 2:03 in the morning, Evan opened the 5th photograph and saw the back of his own neck. Not a reflection, not a software glitch. A photograph. The room in the picture was his room. The damp patch of wall behind his desk, the crooked shelf, stacked with external hard drives, the grey t-shirt stretched across his shoulder blades, the old monitor throwing a sickly blue light onto the nape of his neck. The angle came from the webcam taped over in black electrical tape at the top of the screen. Except when Evan lifted his head to look, that strip of tape was still there, one corner curling slightly from the heat, lying motionless like an eyelid that had learned to play dead. Then it fell. A strip of black electrical tape landed on the desk with a soft, small sound, ordinary to the point of cruelty. Later, whenever he remembered that night, Evan did not first remember the monster, nor the impossible image file, but that frail little tap, the sound of cheap adhesive touching cheap pressed wood, a sound too small to belong to hell, and therefore so real that his back went cold, as if he had leaned against dry ice. On the screen, the 5th photograph was still waiting for him to understand it. The first 4 had only shown a wet intersection somewhere in the city, a tree, street lamps half dead, a strip of empty asphalt shining under the rain. In the first frame, a black shape stood far from the camera. In the second, it was closer. In the third, closer still, and by the 4th, it was almost pressed against the lens, as if darkness had grown a spine and learned how to cross distance without needing time. All the photographs carried the same capture time: 2 hours, 3 minutes and 17 seconds. 5 positions, 1 second. Evan understood images deeply enough to hate that. Hated it the way an old hunter hates finding wolf tracks inside a locked bedroom. He also understood lies well enough to recognize when a lie had not been built for a crowd, but for him alone, sharpened like iron thorns, and placed exactly against the most tender skin. The client had deposited $1,200 and left only one instruction: restore the detail in the shadows, do not alter the composition, do not remove any object from the image. No I. Do it by hand. Evan took the job because rent was due, because his mother's medication had gone up again, because talent without money sometimes amounted to nothing more than a prettier kind of humiliation. He took it because the job was wrong, and wrong things had always been easier for him to touch when they arrived as files, lying obediently inside a folder, able to be renamed, backed up, restored, brightened, sharpened, as if every darkness in the world needed only a patient enough slider. He was a photo editor. He fixed broken images. He wiped evidence clean until it became a memory that could be sold. He had once erased a black car from the edge of an accident photo and told himself a few clusters of dark pixels could not possibly have enough power to ruin anyone's life. Now, the darkness had come for him, The fifth photograph was no longer the intersection, no longer the road, the tree, or the thing moving through the frame. It was his apartment, his desk, his body, and in the corner behind his chair, where the shadow of the closet should have been hollow, something had begun to smile. Evan reached toward the keyboard, his knuckles stiffening as if they had been plunged into ice water. He pressed Alt plus F4, but the software would not close. He yanked the network cable out of the port, but the image remained. He pulled the monitor plug from the outlet, and the screen went black for 10 seconds. 10 brief seconds in which his heart beat against his ribs like a bird trapped in a metal box. Then it lit up again. A new folder sat on the desktop. Day 0. Inside were a text file and a photograph bearing his name. The text file contained only a few lines, but after Evan read them once, the world never returned to its original size. You have made the darkness appear. Now the darkness has your name. 3 days, 5 frames, 1 recipient, 1 blind spot. Do not send it to a stranger. Do not use a fake photograph. Do not erase what has appeared. If you do not complete the next set, you will become an object in someone else's photographs. The first day begins when you see the back of your own neck. Evan closed the file, then opened it again, as though the world might take pity on him after a second click and return those words to their proper place inside a joke. The lines did not change. Outside, the Seattle rain struck the window like static. Inside, the old Pi C wheezed beneath the desk, so steadily that Evan suddenly had the feeling it had been breathing for him for a long time, and only tonight had he finally heard it. 3 hours earlier, the night had still worn the face of an ordinary night. At 2:03 in the morning, inside Evan Cole's studio apartment, only a little more than 130 square feet, it seemed as if only 2 things remained alive. The old computer tower rasping beneath the desk in the hoarse voice of an elderly animal with diseased lungs, and the cheap cigarette burning itself down to the filter in the cloudy plastic ashtray he had stolen from a dive bar 2 blocks away. Everything else looked as though it had been left behind. After a silent evacuation, a faded blue windbreaker, its zipper broken, hung over the back of a peeling office chair. A plastic coffee cup reused for 3 days had gone cold, leaving a burnt brown ring at the bottom. An instant noodle cup lay tipped under the desk, its orange soup dried into a sticky sheet like the sap of a dead tree. On the wall, the final notice from the electric company was pinned beneath a taxi-shaped magnet. Right beside the payment reminder for the old graphics card he still owed money on. A pharmacy receipt curled at the edge beside the keyboard, its ink already fading. The total circled twice in blue pen. Next to it stood the jar of loose coins. Evan was always promising himself he would roll up and take to the laundromat, though lately the jar looked less like emergency money and more like an accounting system for failure. Because if there were enough coins, he washed his clothes, and if there were not, he sprayed deodorant over yesterday's shirt and pretended the room itself was what smelled. The apartment sat on the 3rd floor of an old building, squeezed between a closed laundromat and a 24-hour convenience store that sold lottery tickets, vapes, and hot dogs rotating all night beneath tired red bulbs. Rain had pressed its body into every crack in the building, lived in the window frame, in the mat beside the entryway, in the swollen edges of the pressed wood desk, in the cheap shelf bowing under the weight of external hard drives and unpaid promises, as if Seattle did not need to enter Evan's room because it had been seeping into it for years, cold, damp, persistent as a sorrow that knew how to find its way through concrete. Evan bit his thumbnail whenever he waited for an export, and the flesh at the tip always tasted of salt, metal, and cheap smoke. Down at the curb, his old Honda Civic had refused to start for 3 mornings straight, coughing 10 times before admitting it still belonged to the living. The Civic was older than the people who now looked at Evan in coffee shops as if he were a warning. The check engine light had been on for so long that Evan had stopped seeing it as an alert and started seeing it as part of the dashboard design. The driver's side window would not fully close, and whenever wind came in from the lake, a thin whistle slipped into the car and traveled with him through the city, like someone in the passenger seat trying to speak, but never having enough breath to form a sentence. He had once told himself poverty was temporary, that this was the ugly middle chapter before clients knew his name, and the agencies that had passed him over regretted it. But that middle chapter stretched on until it became the entire book, and rent, software fees, storage fees, his mother's prescriptions, and the cost of keeping his aging equipment alive had tightened his life into invoices, one sheet at a time, heavy as iron chains laid over his shoulders. None of that made him look like a genius in a movie. He looked only like a man nearing 30, losing to his own shadow on the wall. The plaster behind him was bruised with damp, but under the blue glow from the monitor, those stains looked like grain in a severely underexposed photograph. Evan hated damaged images, hated blown highlights, hated skin flattened until it was numb, hated cheap sharpening halos around hair, hated pixels sitting in the wrong places like metal dust caught beneath an eyelid. He could look at a wedding photo that had been dragged through 3-color presets and still find the tiny blur at the edge of the veil. He could watch a night clip and know exactly where an editor had pushed the shadows too far, where someone had tried to hide noise with a cheap layer of clarity. His eye had become a cruel instrument. At parties he still used to attend, he noticed the line of foundation before he noticed the laughter. In restaurants, he looked at reflections in the glass and recalibrated the white balance in his head. On dating apps, he saw pinched jaws, replaced skies, smoothed skin, all the tiny digital apologies people placed over their own bodies. He could not simply look, he judged. That judgment turned inward. In the bathroom mirror, he saw the asymmetry of his face, the nicotine stains, the hollow trenches beneath his eyes. He knew that if he were retouching his own portrait, he would lift the shadows, reduce the redness, add catchlights, correct posture, erase the despair from the corner of his mouth. The fact that he could imagine how to fix it only made the original harder to live with. That habit did not make him noble. It only made him hard to be near, hard to love, hard to forgive, and harder on himself than any client had ever been. His job was not to create truth. His job was to make truth look acceptable. Acceptable was a phrase as elastic as shed snakeskin. Acceptable to the client, to the algorithm, to the bride who did not want her divorced father sharing a frame with her mother, to the landlord who wanted apartment photos that hid the water damage in the wall, to anyone with money and a story that would look better after someone like Evan moved a cursor across it. In his line of work, truth was rarely denied outright. It was softened, balanced, color-corrected, put under the best possible light, and every lie learned to enter the room under those words, polite as a guest with an appointment. The room was so narrow that if Evan leaned back, the wheels of his chair would hit the iron bed frame. The monitor occupied almost the entire swollen MDF tabletop, and above it sat the old webcam sealed beneath black electrical tape. One corner of the tape had curled from the heat, the adhesive glossy like burned skin. Evan had taped it himself months ago, not because he believed he was being watched, but because after years of editing images, a person learned that anything with an eye should never be trusted completely. The webcam had come with an old monitor set bought off Craigslist. The seller had met him in the parking lot outside a big supermarket, handed him the monitor, and said the camera probably still worked. Evan had laughed then, because he did not yet know that broken things were often most dangerous when they looked harmless. A camera did not need to function well in order to accuse you. Sometimes a low-resolution witness was enough. Everything on the desk had a second life. The keyboard came from a shuttered co-working space. The drawing tablet had a long scratch that made brushstrokes stutter in the same place. The mouse had lost its logo beneath his palm, and the Pi C tower was a Frankenstein body of parts from different eras, held together by zip ties, hope, and a side panel that no longer fit. Evan hated that machine. He also loved it with the dependence of someone who had no other way to eat. He had just finished a batch of skin retouching for a cosmetics shop. 172 product images, so similar that after the 80th, he could no longer tell whether he was looking at foundation or the faces of people who had never existed. The client cut the rate in half because the images still look a little dark. And Evan had wanted to swear directly at the screen, but in the end, he only typed, "All right, I'll adjust them." That shop sold softness in small glass bottles. Dewy skin, recovered sleep, natural radiance, confidence with free shipping on orders over $75. Evan had removed pores from models younger than him, lifted the dark circles that had probably been born from the shoot itself, made cracked lips look moisturized, corrected background colors until no one could know what the original face had actually looked like. The work was easy, repetitive, and faintly obscene, like the smell of cheap perfume trapped under fingernails. Once he had tried to explain to a client that skin without texture looked dead. The client replied with a thumbs-up emoji and asked him to make the model look more premium. After that, he stopped explaining. In freelance work, education was unpaid labor and obedience had a rate. In the lower corner of the screen, the job app blinked, a new notification. Evan did not open it right away. He looked at the balance in the digital wallet on his phone with the cracked back glass. $47.83. His landlord's message sat at the top of the screen. "Rent by tomorrow, or I change the locks." Beneath it was a message from his mother. "Are you busy? My medicine went up again this month. Read." No reply. He pressed his thumb into the ragged edge of his nail until it stung, while a small, sharp voice in his head told him to answer her. Just one sentence. But if he answered, then he would have to promise. And once he promised, what could he send besides silence wrapped in apology? His mother lived 3 time zones away, in a 1-bedroom apartment outside Cleveland, where winter made her joints swell, and the pharmacy staff knew her name. She never asked for money directly, which was both her kindness and her cruelty. She sent prescription information, repair information, a few ordinary comments about the landlord, then waited for Evan to do the math himself. He always did the math, and he always failed. He had not visited her in 8 months, blaming work, deadlines, the broken car, the cost of flights. None of those reasons was entirely false, and that was why they were worse than a clean lie, because a clean lie could be cut out, while a half-truth clung to everything like poisoned honey. He clicked the notification. Client name, M05 Restoration. Verified account. Clean payment history. 5-star rating but only 1 review. Left by a user named Nina Hart. Her account was inactive. No company logo, no avatar, only a grey circle with the letter M in the center, balanced in a way that looked less like design than a carefully measured emptiness. The account had been created 6 years ago and used only once, with no portfolio, no public posts, no founder bio trying to appear human. The location field said United States, the sort of information a platform displayed when it knew more but did not want to say it. The only review read, "Fast delivery, accurate restoration." A sentence so ordinary it should have vanished the moment he finished reading it. And exactly that made it turn sour in Evan's stomach like cold coffee. He clicked the reviewer's name and found only an empty profile, 1 dead 5-star rating, and the word inactive where there should have been some sign of a human life. Evan skimmed the profile and almost closed it. No decent client hired a retoucher at 2 in the morning. Then the number beneath the job stopped his hand. $1,200. Escrow locked. Deadline. 5 in the morning. The brief had only 3 lines. Evan read them once, then again, each word sliding through his eyes like a silver hook. Restored detail in the shadow areas. Do not alter the composition. Do not remove any object from the image. 5 attachments waited below, numbered blind frame 01 through blind frame 05. Evan narrowed his eyes. He checked the client's profile, the displayed IP region, the deposit trace, the verification status. Everything was present, too present, so clean it looked as if it had been wiped with alcohol. Real clients usually left something blank, misspelled something, asked the same question 6 times about a Facebook banner. This profile had no fingerprints. The platform displayed trust signals like anti-scam charms. Payment verified, identity checked, funds held, no disputes. Evan had learned not to believe in those charms. He had seen verified accounts vanish after chargebacks, seen brand managers use company email addresses to argue over $20. But there was still a difference between ordinary fraud and this kind of cleanliness. Ordinary fraud smelled human. This job did not. He opened the file list without downloading it yet. Every thumbnail was black, not underexposed in the normal way, where the outline of a room or horizon still lurked under the dark. Black like something deliberately withheld. The file sizes were small compared to the listed resolution. Heavily compressed. Compact. Easy to send. Easy to infect, the paranoid part of him said. Easy to plant in a machine, another part answered. Evan typed. How much detail do you need restored? What will the images be used for? 2 professional questions, but also a defensive fence. A brief with a purpose belonged to the normal world. Court evidence, archival restoration, insurance claim, art project, family photo, supernatural YouTube channel. Any cheap answer the client wanted to invent. Purpose-built a fence around an image file. Without it, an image could become anything. Evan watched the typing indicator appear, then disappear. He imagined someone on the other side weighing which lie would fit him best, and he hated the feeling that he was waiting for a stranger's permission to distrust a job that had been wrong from the moment it appeared. 3 seconds later, a message from M05 Restoration appeared. Just brighten the darkness enough to see what's inside. Evan stared at the sentence for a long time. The fan in the PC tower screeched like an insect trapped in a plastic box. Out in the hallway, water from someone's air conditioner dripped onto the metal awning below, 1 drop at a time, regular enough that it could not be ignored. The mini fridge he had bought from a graduating student trembled, exhaled, then cut off, leaving the room thick with the smell of hot plastic and sour coffee. The building had its own night language. Pipes knocked behind the walls. Someone on the 2nd floor laughed once and then coughed as if the laugh had scraped their throat raw. A delivery truck backed into the alley, beeped 3 times, then stopped. From the convenience store below came the exhale of the automatic door and the little bell that never sounded cheerful after midnight. Evan listened to all of it while that sentence lay on the screen. Just brighten the darkness enough to see what's inside. It had the flatness of a technical instruction and the rhythm of a threat. Clients usually wanted something brighter, cleaner, prettier. They did not talk about darkness as if it were a box. He typed, "By do not remove any object, do you mean if there is a person or vehicle in the shadow area, it stays?" The chat bubble blinked, then replied, "It stays." Evan typed that heavy noise might require automated cleanup or manual reconstruction. M05 Restoration answered with only 4 words. No I. By hand. Evan often told clients that photo editing was a service. They asked, he delivered, as long as the money transferred. That was the clean version. The dirtier truth was that on some nights, when he made a tired face look well rested, erased a bruise, or pushed someone out of a wedding photograph, until they looked as though they had never existed, something private rose in his throat. Not pleasure, not pride. It was the feeling of standing behind one-way glass, watching another person's life being dismantled layer by layer, knowing that with the right shortcut, he could make someone look innocent, beautiful, trustworthy, or absent from memory. Every job came wrapped in language that softened the request. Clean this up. Make it less distracting. Fix the background. Reduce the problem area. No one said erase evidence. No one said make me sellable. Those euphemisms were part of the invoice. Evan hated admitting that, so he called it technique. Technique sounded innocent. Technique had no morality. Technique only had clean and dirty, sharp and broken, right and wrong. But some sins did not begin with knives or screams. Some sins began with a mouse click, so soft no one could hear it. A click could be very polite. It could happen after midnight, while a cigarette died in a stolen ashtray, and the whole city slept without knowing what had just changed. A click left no blood on the sleeve, called no witness to the door. It left a new file, a flattened layer, a modification date, a version history no one checked. That was what frightened Evan most about his own profession. It allowed cowardice to wear precision like a shirt. It allowed him to hurt people from a distance and call that distance professional. Evan laughed under his breath, without a trace of humor. The client knew the craft, knew the things outsiders did not ask. $1,200 for 3 hours of work was enough to make suspicion bow its head. He hated that. He hated how easily he could be bought. But rent was still there. His mother's message was still there. The graphics card still had 2 months of payments left, and beneath all of it, in a place he rarely named, was the need to prove that he was still the best person in this room. Even if the room was as small as a storage closet, and there was no one else inside it. He downloaded the 5 files. The progress bar moved too quickly for high-resolution photographs. In downloads, the thumbnails lined up in a row. 5 squares, almost completely black, so dark they looked empty. The folder generated itself in downloads under a meaningless string of letters and numbers from the platform. Evan renamed it before he could stop himself, giving it a name that made it look as though it belonged to him. Naming something was a way of pretending it stood inside an order he understood. He sorted by date, checked file size, hovered over each icon, reading preview data as if the operating system might whisper a warning. The 5 black squares looked identical until he stared long enough. Then he began imagining tiny differences. This one was a little warmer, that one had a gray pressure in the lower left corner, another had a deeper patch of black in the center. He knew his brain was inventing signal out of noise. He also knew the human brain had survived by doing exactly that. Before opening the first file, Evan sat still. The cheap digital clock on the wall did not tick. It jumped minutes with a dry click. Wind slipped through the aluminum gap in the window, carrying the smell of wet asphalt, soaked garbage in the alley, and a thin streak of gasoline from someone's car below. He had a ritual before difficult photographs. Clear the desktop, close extra tabs. Put the reference folder on the left monitor, the working file on the right. Check the color profile. Save immediately under a new name. Those rituals turned a chaotic file into a client, and clients could be managed. But now he only sat there, one hand hovering over the mouse, waiting for a reason not to continue. No reason came. The landlord's message remained where it was. His mother's message sat beneath it. The escrow number glowed with the vulgar solidity of money being held by someone else. A small gecko clicked somewhere on the ceiling. It was tiny. It should have meant nothing. But in that silence, the sound was like fingernails scraping across glass. Evan swallowed. His throat was dry and bitter with smoke. Open it, he told himself. It's only a photograph. Photographs don't bite. He dragged the first file, Blind Frame 01, into the editing software. The screen became a field of black gray. The histogram was crushed hard to the left. severe underexposure. Evan turned his wrist slightly and set 2 fingers on the mouse. Familiar motions always calmed him, like stroking the fur of a tamed animal. He raised the exposure slowly, not letting noise swallow the image, preserving the real details still buried under the dark. He barely had to think. It felt like opening the skin of a body that had agreed not to move. He did not drag the slider brutally. Amateurs did that, and turned darkness into mud. Evan worked in small increments: exposure, curves, shadows, a breath of contrast, then back again. He watched the histogram widen like a lung, heard the PXE fan accelerate as the software recalculated. He let the image rise up like a face surfacing from water, first as mass, then direction, then the dreadful suggestion of intent. From the darkness, an intersection appeared. Wet road, faded lane markings, half-dead streetlights hanging dirty yellow rings. On the left stood a large mulberry tree, its trunk almost black. Farther away, a row of closed shops. No pedestrians, no cars. Nothing to prove the place still belonged to a living city. It could have been any American street corner after rain. A grocery store with its metal shutter pulled down. A payday loan sign glowing a dead red. A bus stop poster peeling on one side. So the model's face folded into itself. A blue mailbox leaned near the curb. A plastic bag clung to the storm drain like a drowned animal. Overhead, power lines cut the sky into hard black strokes. The photograph had not been composed for beauty. The person who took it stood at a practical height, slightly back from the curb. The lens tilted as if waiting for traffic that would never come. It looked more like surveillance than art. A witness image. Evidence without a case yet. Evan leaned back. A night street photo. Not difficult, not worth $1,200. He zoomed to 200%, then 300, checking the dark area under the tree. There, a black mass did not blend into the trunk, did not behave like a cast shadow, and did not resemble ordinary sensor crush. It stood off-center, thin and rigid. If forced to name it, Evan would have said it looked like a person with their back turned, head lowered at an angle that was just slightly wrong. That wrongness was not dramatic, and therefore worse. No claws, no theatrical silhouette, no white face waiting in the dark. Only a posture outside the grammar of the human body. Shoulders too narrow for its height, neck disappearing too quickly. Head lowered not like sleepiness, not like grief, but like something pausing to listen to a sound beneath the road. Evan dragged a guideline from the ruler and measured the figure against the street sign. He did not know why he was doing it. Measurement was also a form of superstition. If he could prove that body had a normal height, maybe the feeling in his stomach would become ordinary fear instead of something older. He pushed the shadows again. The surrounding details brightened. Cracks in the road emerged. The bottle near the drain separated from the black ground. Leaves detached from the background. But the dark figure kept the same solid black density, as if someone had painted ink over that spot alone, and then saved the file. Evan clicked his tongue. Sensor error, maybe. Motion blur. A pedestrian. One of 1,000 boring things the internet turned into ghosts. He had debunked enough fake horror photos for friends to know the usual tricks. Long exposure, glass reflection, compression, pareidolia, bad masking, staged props too clean to be convincing. The internet loved being fooled, and loved proving it had not been fooled even more. Evan belonged to the second group when he was not being paid by the first. He opened each color channel red, green, blue. The dark mass remained, not like a clean object, but like a stubborn refusal. It did not behave like a trick. It behaved like an answer withheld by someone who knew exactly how much to show him. He saved a temporary version into a new folder and named it done_V1. When he dragged the second file into the software, nothing happened at first. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The PXE fan hummed. A mosquito whined beneath the desk. The pipe in the bathroom swallowed with a gulp, as if someone behind the wall had just swallowed saliva. The cigarette had burned nearly to the filter, sending a cheap, acrid taste across his tongue. Then the phone on the desk vibrated. His mother. "Are you asleep yet?" Evan looked at the screen, then turned the phone face down. He told himself he would finish this job and send money in the morning. Once there was money, everything would be easier to explain. That was how he postponed every truth in his life. Wait until there was money. He opened the second file, blind frame 02. The same intersection, the same wet road, dirty yellow lights, mulberry tree on the left. But under the tree, no one stood anymore. Evan zoomed in. The black figure was standing in the middle of the road. It stood on the lane divider, a little taller than an ordinary person. Its arms hung down, too long. Though that could have been lens distortion, its head was no longer lowered. Its face was only a collapsed patch of pixels, but Evan had a tooth-crawling sense that it had turned toward the camera. He sat up straight. The chair creaked under him. The sound was embarrassingly loud. Evan glanced toward the door, as if someone in the hallway might hear him reacting to a photograph. That, more than the image, made him angry. Fear made him perform for an audience that did not exist. He tapped his index finger against the edge of the mouse. Once, twice, 3 times. That tiny rhythm held him in place. He had used it before client calls, before opening angry emails, before looking at bills he could not pay. Count 3 taps. Breathe. Find the technical cause. The world was allowed to be ugly, but it was not allowed to be impossible. The feeling of being looked back at by a photograph was absurd. A photograph did not look at anyone. It was dead light. Photons through glass, sensor, compression, data. There was no intent in data, no weighting in pixels. But Evan had worked with images long enough to know that some frames made the viewer feel caught, even when no one in the picture looked directly out. Composition, contrast, light direction, visual pathways. He explained it to himself that way. He had explained worse things with better language. A black shape became underexposure. A lie became post-production. A guilty pause on someone's mouth became an unflattering candid. The right vocabulary could wrap a rotting thing until it could be carried away without dirtying anyone's hands. This is the same, he told himself. A composition issue. The human brain hunts for faces. The viewer projects intention onto objects. Fear supplies motion. Nothing in the file knows his name. Then he pushed the shadows again. The pixels where the face should have been trembled. Not because the photograph moved. Obviously, the photograph did not move, but when the cursor passed over it, the grey clusters shifted very slightly, as if dust had been disturbed by breath. Evan stopped, checked the adjustment layer. No keyframes, no smart object, nothing but a normal JPEG file. He closed the image and opened it again. The figure was still there. The freelance chat flashed with a new instruction. Do not stop at the second image. The message came too soon after his hesitation. Not after an upload, not after a completed draft, not after any action the client could have observed from the platform. After he stopped moving his hand, it was the first moment Evan allowed himself to think that perhaps this job was not watching the image files. It was watching him. He checked the chat log. No unusual read receipt. No remote cursor, no screen sharing icon, no warning of a strange session. The interface looked innocent. Interfaces always did. Evan looked at the clock, 2:27 am. He had never hated a message so much. The third file opened before him like another cut. The same angle, but the distance had changed. The intersection was closer, the lane markings thicker. Faraway lights dragged into streaks because of a slow shutter speed, or because the photographer's hand had trembled. Evan saw the black figure before adjusting anything. He set his hand on the mouse and did not move. In the image, it was very tall, too tall compared to the street lamp. narrow shoulders, thin body, legs, stretching down to the wet road. Evan raised the exposure slowly. Noise bloomed everywhere, but the figure did not break. The more he brightened it, the more it looked like an object captured by another camera. Clearer, closer, disobeying the background's depth of field. He opened the metadata: severe underexposure, slow shutter, full-frame camera, 35mm lens. Capture time: 2 hours 3 minutes and 17 seconds. The capture date had been removed. Full frame with a 35mm lens meant someone had equipment, not some kid making a creepypasta on a phone. The missing date bothered him more than a fake one would have. A fake date tried to persuade. An absent date refused to participate. He checked the compression history. Saved multiple times, but not dirty, in the way of an image passed through social media. The file had been processed, prepared, passed through software that knew how to erase fingerprints while leaving enough technical residue for him to chase. Whoever created this did not merely understand fear. They understood workflow. He checked the first image. 2 hours 3 minutes and 17 seconds. The second as well. All 5 photographs had been taken in the same second. Evan did not like that. Cold crawled down the back of his neck. Not like wind, but like someone had taken a piece of ice from the freezer and dragged it along his spine. Camera clocks could be wrong. Metadata could be faked. But if someone had built this as a joke, they knew exactly how to make him uncomfortable. No jump scare, no cheap monster. Just one small contradiction placed where a photo editor could not stop looking. That contradiction was a hook under the skin. 5 images, 1 timestamp. 5 positions, 1 moment. Either the files were lying, or time was. Evan preferred a liar. A liar had motives, habits, passwords, IP addresses. Time did not. You could not file a platform support complaint against time. He zoomed into the face area in the 3rd image. Or what should have been a face. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Only a swollen gray area, like skin stretched under wet cloth. He immediately zoomed back out. His heart was beating fast, and he hated that. He hated that a JPEG could make his body betray him. The chat flashed again. M05 Restoration wrote, "The clearer you make it, the more accurate it becomes." Accurate was not a word clients used restoration unless they understood the ethics of restoration. Accurate to what? To the sensor? To the scene? To memory? To something that had not happened yet? Evan read the sentence 3 times, and each time the room seemed to tilt a little more. The client was not asking him to restore lost detail. The client was describing a transformation. He had spent years believing clarity was unquestionably good. Make it appear, make it sharp, make it readable. That message suggested clarity might be a process of manufacture. The more he saw, the more real that thing became. Evan typed, "The file is corrupted. The metadata is wrong." The answer came at once. Metadata does not matter. Darkness matters. Evan asked what the images were for. No reply. He moved the cursor toward the dispute button and stopped over the escrow number. $1,200 lay beyond one submit. He thought of rent, his mother's medicine, the clients who owed him money while already posting the images he had edited. He thought of the feeling of being dragged lower than his own skill. The dispute button looked almost moral. It promised procedure, explain the problem, attach screenshots, wait for review. A clean tunnel back to ordinary life. But Evan knew procedure had business hours, and hunger did not. The landlord would not care that a file was behaving strangely. The pharmacy would not accept fear as payment. Platforms protected users in theory, and protected money in practice. He hated himself for still calculating while afraid. He hated that animal arithmetic. How much fear equaled rent? How much disgust equaled medication? How many pieces of himself could be rented out for 3 hours if the number was high enough? He opened the 4th image, blind frame 04, before the photograph appeared. Evan smelled something strange. It arrived before sight, and for that reason felt older than the screen. His body reacted before his mind could name it. Saliva gathered under his tongue. His stomach tightened. The scratches around his nails began to sting, as if the air had found them. He turned his head toward the trash can, the ashtray, the heater. Nothing explained it. The smell did not fill the room. It chose him, a private smell, placed exactly at the back of his mouth. Iron rust, not strong, not clear, only a thin taste like blood from a cracked tooth. It could not come from a photograph. A screen had no smell. A JPEG had no smell. But it was there, cold and metallic on his tongue. Another voice inside him, hoarse and urgent, said, "Stop brightening it. That's enough. Rent isn't worth this. Your mother doesn't need to know how low you've sunk." This time, the figure was pressed against the lens. The frame was almost filled by a black surface. Evan raised the exposure, and the wrong curves of a face emerged. Not a complete face, but the memory of a face after too many bad saves. Jagged edges, flattened shadows, features dragged out of alignment. The eye sockets were only pits of noise, but the whole screen seemed to lean toward Evan through them. The mouth was the clearest part. Not quite a smile. Not quite a tear. A curve too long, pulled from one side to the other, as if both corners had been dragged outward, until the face lost the mathematics of being human. Human faces obeyed proportion, even when they were ugly, tired, injured, old, or afraid. Evan knew that from retouching so intimate, he did not want to admit it. There was a mathematics to recognition. The distance between the eyes, the weight of the lower lip, the fold from nose to mouth, the way cheekbones resisted light. This mouth ignored that entire grammar. It looked like an expression, but not one belonging to a face that could feel. That made it unbearable. Not because it looked dead, because it looked like an imitation of communication made by something that had learned the first feature wrong. Out of habit, Evan created a new layer and moved the brush to cover part of that mouth, to make the image easier to look at. The impulse shamed him the instant he recognized it. He was not supposed to improve the image. The brief had said not to erase anything, but habit moved faster than ethics. His hand knew the route. New layer, soft brush. Sample a nearby tone. Reduce whatever made the client uncomfortable. He had done it thousands of times, made grief easier to look at, made anger less visible, made evidence quieter. Now, before he could think, he was trying to make this face easier to survive. From the speaker came a low sound that was neither a system alert nor static. It sounded like a wet surface being stretched and sewn back together with blunt thread. Evan jerked his hand away from the mouse. The sound was not loud, but it slid straight into the roots of his teeth. For 1 second, he had the feeling that his hand itself had just touched a substance that did not belong on a screen. He tried to clean a patch of noise at the corner of the mouth. The interface looked normal, but the brushed area did not smooth out. It puckered like old scar tissue on paper. Then a dark red line slid out of the image window and flowed into the layers panel, slow and heavy as liquid behind glass. It crawled across folder names. The trash icon. Old files named Final. Final Fix. Final really. The desktop became obscene precisely because it remained a desktop. The familiar icons did not vanish into some cinematic hell. They stayed exactly where they were. Invoices, client folders, unfiled tax receipts, mom medical, portfolio maybe. The red streak passed over all of them with calm ownership. It did not need to break the system. It only needed to prove the system had never been sealed. Evan lifted both hands from the keyboard. The cursor remained there, trembling by a tiny fraction of a pixel. He told himself it was eye strain. Then the cursor trembled again. He zoomed in and tried to cover the damaged edge with clean road texture. No road appeared. Beneath the cursor, between broken JPEG blocks, an eye opened, large and motionless, as if it had been waiting for him to copy it all along. He pressed Ctrl-Z. The eye vanished. Half a second later, the speaker clicked back at him, as if a second hand had also just undone something. When the brush touched the image again, the cursor froze. A small dialogue box appeared. Evan read the sentence inside it with the inside of his skull. "You cannot hide what has been seen." He went still. His software did not have that dialogue box. He killed the program through Task Manager. The screen flickered and returned to the desktop. All the icons disappeared for a few seconds. When they came back, a new folder sat in the upper left corner. Day 0. The folder icon was an ordinary yellow. That was what made it disgusting. A haunted thing should have arrived with cracked glass, inverted letters, a face in the wallpaper, but the system placed it exactly where Windows always placed a new folder, aligned with the invisible grid, polite as Office software. Horror that respected icon spacing was much harder to deny. Evan hovered over it without clicking. After 1 second, the tooltip appeared. "Empty folder," the system declared. "Created today. Modified today." A lie delivered in the calm voice of a machine that did not know it was lying. Evan did not open it. He looked at the folder, then at the webcam taped over at the top of the monitor. The tape was still there, but one corner had curled higher than before. The room was so quiet, even the Pi-C seemed to be running in another apartment. His phone vibrated with a message from Ben Carter. "You still awake? Saw you online on the freelance app. Don't take ghost jobs at 2 in the morning, dumbass." Ben was the only person who still spoke to Evan as if Evan were normal. They had studied design together, stayed up all night cutting ads for coffee shops, promised they would open their own studio. Ben had taken an agency job. Salary, insurance, co-workers to complain about after hours. Evan had chosen freelance because he could not stand anyone breathing over his shoulder and commenting on each layer. Years later, Ben still dragged him out to eat, paid before Evan could argue, then joked, "When you're rich, pay me back with interest." Evan hated owing anyone. He owed Ben too much to pretend otherwise. Ben was not saintly. If he were saintly, he would have been easier to hate. He was hot-tempered, blunt, sometimes smug about having chosen a real job. He could talk for 20 minutes about agency politics and forget to ask whether Evan had eaten. He had a talent for turning concern into insult. But Ben stayed. In Evan's life, staying had become the rarest form of loyalty. Their friendship survived on jokes at the wrong time, borrowed charging cables, rides home, and silences neither of them dissected. Evan had ruined better things with less guilt than the guilt he carried for Ben. There was one thing Evan had never told Ben. He was afraid of Ben not because Ben was weak, but because Ben always showed up. Ben was the kind of person who arrived 5 minutes late, but did not cancel, cursing Evan while quietly paying for coffee, plugging the power strip back in, picking cigarette ash off the floor. People like that were easily turned into tools in a horror story, because audiences remembered them only as the friend who came to help. But to Evan, Ben was proof that he had once had an ordinary life, that someone had once trusted him without a contract, a deposit, or a brief. Evan was about to answer when the freelance chat jumped above everything. The new message said, "Open the 5th image." He did not want to, but the sentence no longer felt like a request. It felt like a truth waiting for him to admit he had no choice. The room dropped back into silence. Not the clean silence of late night, but a dirty silence, full of old wires crackling in the outlet, damp wood swelling, his stomach folding in on itself because all day it had lived on coffee. Stale cigarette smoke coiled around the mold smell on the wall, raw and earthy like newly dug soil. Evan set his hand on the mouse. His index finger was wet with sweat. The thought bit into him. If the 5th image is only a joke, you will never know unless you open it. If you open it, you may never come back. He opened the 5th file, blind frame 05. The double click sounded like a sentence being passed. Evan had never noticed how much power that tiny sound carried. A finger tapping plastic. A command entering the world. The software obeyed. The file opened. Consequences bloomed. Absurdly, he wanted to take back the pressure before the mouse could register it. For one suspended second, the program showed only the loading wheel. Evan watched the circle turn and thought of everything that could still happen. Corrupted file, error message, crash, nothing. He found himself praying for a glitch, to a god he did not believe in, and a file system he had been cursing since college. At first the image was completely black. Evan raised the shadows. No intersection, no wet road, no mulberry tree. From the darkness emerged a damp wall, a cluttered shelf, the chipped edge of a wooden desk, and at the bottom of the frame, the back of a man's neck as he sat before a computer screen. Evan stopped breathing. The man wore a grey t-shirt with a stretched collar. A small white thread stuck out at the back of the neckline, where it had once caught on the zipper of Evan's windbreaker. Evan knew that thread. He had meant to cut it 3 times and forgotten all 3. The 5th photograph had not captured the intersection. It had captured his room. From the angle of the webcam at the top of the monitor, Evan lifted his head and looked at the webcam. The black tape fell onto the desk. It fell sticky side down, without drama. No wind, no hand, no visible, invisible force. Only the soft tap of tape meeting laminate. Evan stared at it with a depth of terror he would have laughed at if he had seen it in someone else. Cheap tape, curved at one end, dust caught along its edge. An object belonging to the real world. That was the problem. A file could be blamed on a machine. Tape belonged to physics. The webcam lens, no longer covered, looked like a small blind eye pretending innocence. No one screamed in real life the way people screamed in movies. Evan did not scream. His throat felt stuffed with cotton. His tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth with the sour taste of old coffee. His right hand still rested on the worn mouse, index finger bent and trembling slightly. The body chose stillness before courage could give a speech. Evan had once hated horror characters for freezing in doorways, staring at impossible things instead of running. Now he understood, to move. First, you needed a theory of where to go. He had none. The threat was not at the window, not under the bed, not behind him, in any place his eyes could confirm. It lay in the relationship between the screen and the room, and every direction belonged to that relationship. He listened for any breath that was not his, only his own breathing, shallow and humiliating. He looked at the webcam, the fallen tape, then back at the screen. 3 points formed a triangle. Eye, evidence, image. Evan's mind tried to arrange cause and effect between them. The webcam saw him. The file showed him. The tape proved that seeing could have happened. But the order refused to hold still. Had the tape fallen before the image, or after? Had the image made him notice the tape falling, or had that noticing become part of the image? He hated questions whose answers changed depending on where the frame began. A distorted command rang inside his head. Don't blink. If you blink, it will move. If it moves, you'll have to believe. In the image, the back of the man's neck remained motionless. Evan's neck. The skin beneath the hairline pale in the monitor glow. Behind the chair, the darkness beside the closet was denser than the rest of the room. He pressed Alt plus F4. The editing software did not close. He pressed it again. Nothing happened. He yanked the network cable. The taskbar icon changed to a warning sign. The image stayed open. He pulled the monitor power cord. The screen went black, but the PC kept running. In the dark glass, Evan saw his own face, warped by the low angle. Behind his shoulder, the cramped room, the closet, the damp wall, the shelf. No one. He exhaled so long it hurt his chest. For the first 10 seconds, there was only the tower fan and the last rain of the night tapping the awning outside. In the next 10 seconds, he heard more things. The digital clock jumping 1 minute, the phone charger touching the edge of the desk, his collar rubbing against his throat when he swallowed. Small, stupid sounds. They frightened him more because everything in the room continued normally, except the dead monitor that would not stay dead. The air smelled of hot metal, like wiring left plugged in too long. His shirt stuck to his back. A bead of sweat ran from his armpit down his ribs, cold and itching. Then the screen lit again. Evan looked down. The power cord was still loose from the outlet. Or he remembered pulling it loose. Panic could cut an action into the wrong frame. When he lifted his head, the screen was no longer showing the editing software. It was showing the Day Zero folder. Inside were two files, a text file named red-me.txt, a photograph named Evan-behind.jpg. Evan shot to his feet so fast. The chair rolled back and struck the bed frame. He backed away until his spine hit the wall. The small room suddenly seemed too large because it held too many dark corners to check. Under the desk, behind the curtain, the closet gap, the space beneath the door. He turned on the ceiling light. The LED bulb flickered twice, then stabilized. The apartment looked dirty, cramped, and empty. No one. Evan plugged the monitor back in by reflex, though he was no longer sure the monitor needed it. Day Zero remained open. The cursor hovered over, read me like a pointing finger. He opened Task Manager. No suspicious processes. Editing software, browser, freelance app, tablet driver, system noise. He opened the camera device list. The webcam showed active. He checked the file access time. Day Zero had been created at 2 hours 3 minutes and 17 seconds. He clung to menus and control panels because they still spoke in categories. Processes, services, devices, permissions, words made by engineers with the belief that strange things could become less strange once placed under a tab. Evan clicked through them with almost religious concentration. The camera status line said, "Working properly." The phrase was so calm he almost laughed. Working properly meant it had done exactly what it had been made to do. Look at whatever sat in front of it. The problem was that Evan no longer knew which side of being seen he stood on. The same time as the hidden data inside all 5 images. He called Ben. The phone rang 4 times before Ben picked up in a voice thick with sleep. "What?" "Deadline on fire. Ben." Evan heard how low his own voice had gone. "Are you messing with me?" "Messing with what? Did someone send you files? Did you help anyone hack my computer?" A pause. "What are you smoking?" "I'm serious." "No, I'm asleep. My wife is already pissed that the phone rang." "What happened?" Evan looked at the webcam. "I took a job. Weird images. Now there's a photo of my room." Ben's voice changed. "Your room? Webcam?" "Yeah. You taped over your webcam." "The tape fell off." "Then it probably fell off earlier." "Malware?" "I told you to stop installing cracked plugins." Evan wanted to cling to that explanation. Malware, hack, remote access. Some sick person who knew him, knew the room, knew his work hours. All of it was possible. Difficult, but possible. The alternative was not. He imagined the human version with desperate gratitude. A stalker with time. An old client. Someone from a forum. Someone who had watched a photo editing live stream of his and learned the layout of the room. If the enemy was human, they could be traced. If the enemy was human, they could make mistakes. If the enemy was human, they could be confronted, sued, reported to the police, even understood. For Evan, understanding mattered more than safety. If he understood a thing, he could survive by turning it into work. "Can you come over?" Evan asked. "Now?" "Yeah." "Evan, it's 2:30 in the morning." That ordinary objection almost broke him. 2:30 in the morning. A time for sleeping, for arguing with your wife, because the phone rang, for drunk students outside bars, for rideshare drivers waiting near hospitals. Ben spoke as if the clock still governed the world. Evan wanted to crawl inside that assumption and close the door behind him. He almost said, "Never mind." Pride rose by reflex, ready to cover the wound. Then he looked at day 0 waiting on the screen and understood that pride had become an unlocked entrance. Evan did not answer. He heard Ben sigh, heard sheets rustle, heard a woman mutter behind him. Ben lowered his voice. "Send me the photo." "No." "Why?" Evan looked at the 3 brief lines still open on the screen. "Do not remove any object. No I. By hand. I don't know." Ben was silent longer this time. "Is your door locked?" "Yeah." "Don't open anything else. Screenshot it and send me the screenshot, not the original file." Evan reached for the print screen key, then stopped. A cold thought slipped into his head. What if this thing worked by making other people see it? The thought was ridiculous, but ridiculous no longer protected him. "I'll come to your place in the morning," Evan said. "Fine. Shut the computer down. Unplug it. Try to sleep." "You think I can sleep?" "Then at least stay away from the screen. Your eyes are dead." That annoyed him. "I'm fine. You always say that right before you're not fine." Evan hung up. He stood in the middle of the room, phone in hand, staring at the computer, as if it were an animal pretending to be dead. Day 0 remained open. The README file waited. He told himself not to open it. Shut the machine down, unplug it, sit in the hallway until morning. That was the reasonable plan. But a perfectionist did not escape a question by leaving the room. The longer a question lay still, the deeper it ate. He thought of every night he had stayed up to fix a 1-pixel seam no one else would notice. He had skipped meals over color banding, lost sleep over hair masks, ignored calls because a reflection did not match its environment. He told himself that was discipline. Mara had once called it cowardice with a magnifying glass. Now the question waited on the desktop, and it knew the shape of his weakness. It did not need to chase him. It only needed to remain unresolved. Evan sat down again. He opened README after biting off a piece of his little fingernail and spitting it into the ashtray. There was no long document, only a few black lines on the clean white field of Notepad, so clean it looked like an unsigned death certificate. Default font. That detail chilled him. Whoever, or whatever, had created this file was not trying to appear ancient, demonic, theatrical. No symbols, no corrupted characters, no red letters, just ordinary black text, the kind used for grocery lists, meeting notes, apology drafts, hotline numbers taped inside clinics, and instructions left by someone who believed they would be obeyed. Evan leaned closer even though he did not want to. The screen glow flattened his face onto the window glass behind it. For 1 second he saw 2 Evans, the one reading and the one reflected over the words, white as a ghost, already halfway inside the file. "You have made the darkness appear. Now the darkness has your name. 3 days. 5 frames. 1 recipient. 1 blind spot. Do not send it to a stranger. Do not use a fake photograph. Do not erase what has appeared. If you do not complete the next set, you will become an object in someone else's photographs. The first day begins when you see the back of your own neck." Evan closed the file, opened it again. The words did not change. He tried to make the lines behave like normal text. Select all, copy, paste into a blank document. The copied lines appeared with the same spacing, the same blank stubbornness. He changed the font to Times New Roman, then Courier, then back to default. The threat did not become different in a different typeface. That offended him in a childish way. Design was supposed to mean something. Presentation was supposed to change reception. Here, the content endured every style he applied to it. He deleted the copied file without saving. His hand shook harder after deleting than before. He opened Evan behind. The file opened faster than it should have. No loading, no progress bar, no hesitation from the machine. Evan resented its efficiency. Horror should at least need time to process. In the second before the photograph filled the screen, he saw the title bar and his name inside it. Evan behind. The phrase made his body feel misplaced. A person's name should point forward, toward the face, toward the person being called from across a room. Seeing his name attached to the back of his own neck felt like being summoned from the wrong side of himself. The photograph showed him from behind, close to the webcam angle, but this time the monitor did not block the view. It was as if someone had stood directly behind the computer, slightly higher than the webcam. Evan sat in the middle of the frame, shoulders hunched. Behind him, in the darkness beside the closet, was a narrow black streak. He zoomed in. The streak had no clear shape, but near the top, level with Evan's shoulder, there was a faint curve, like the corner of a mouth practicing how to smile. Evan closed the file, deleted the folder, emptied the trash, pulled the Pi-Shi power cord. The room fell into silence. This silence had weight. It pressed on his eardrums, the tabletop, the faded jacket, the dried noodle cup near his foot. From the bathroom came the sound of water dripping into a plastic bucket. Tick, tick, tick. Each drop sounded like a mouse click stretched too long. 10 seconds later, his phone lit up. A system photo notification slid across the screen. Day 0 has been backed up. Evan opened the photo library. A new album had appeared. He had not truly shut anything down. The phone still believed it was helping. It had uploaded the horror with the same cheerful mindlessness it used for receipts and screenshots. The album sat between camera roll and favorites, indexed, dated, searchable. Somewhere on a server farm he would never see, a machine had recognized a new set of photographs and preserved them for his convenience. Evan stared at the word backed up until it changed meaning. Backed up meant safe. Backed up meant protected. Backed up meant impossible to lose. He had relied on that promise for years. Now, it sounded like a sentence. Day 0. Morning made the city so rough it was almost believable, because cars began starting outside with the hoarse coughs of cold metal. A garbage truck groaned along the curb, like an old animal dragged across concrete on a chain. Someone downstairs argued about rent. A child cried because school still existed. All those dirty, real, living sounds did not need exposure lifted, did not need shadows restored, did not need someone like Evan to drag them out of the dark to prove they were present. Seattle at dawn looked like an unedited photograph, wet, flat, gray, honest in an unlovable way. Old newspapers softened in front of apartment doors, a man in a reflective vest cursing at a parking payment machine, steam rising from a sewer grate, with the theatrical melancholy of a city trying to look noir, a woman in scrubs hurrying across the street, with a backpack slipping from one shoulder and a paper coffee cup in her hand, her face bare, exhausted, pores intact. Evan wanted to thank her for looking like a real person, for proving there were still things in the world a camera could fail to make prettier. Daylight did not make last night less real. It only made the panic harder to confess. Evan left the apartment at 6:30, eyes red as if rubbed with salt, hair flattened at the back of his head where he himself had seen it in that photograph. He did not shower, only pulled on his jacket, shoved the laptop into his backpack, locked the door twice, then stood staring at the lock for several more seconds, as if a door could stop something that did not need to pass through doors, as if metal, bolts and hinges were still meaningful words. The coffee shop where Ben had agreed to meet sat on the ground floor of a small office building on East Lake Avenue. In the morning it was full of office workers, cheap perfume, the smell of toasted bagels, floor cleaner, and burnt espresso, and that mixture struck Evan's nose like evidence that human beings still knew how to stand in line, order drinks, complain about meetings, and that the world, at least here, was still pretending not to be cracked. Evan chose a table in the corner, his back to the wall, eyes able to see the entrance, both hands hidden beneath the tabletop, so Ben would not see him tearing skin from around his thumb. The cafe had exposed brick walls, a few hanging plants, and a chalk menu written in handwriting, too careful to be truly casual. At the register was a sticker pledging ethically sourced coffee beans, a phrase so pretty that bitterness rose in Evan's throat. because even coffee was granted ethics, while he lived by erasing whatever made people uncomfortable. The tables were close enough for strangers to hear each other break up and pretend not to. Evan sat in the corner because from there he could see 2 exits reflected in the pastry case. He had never been the kind of person who planned escape routes. Fear had made him practical. He arrived 20 minutes early. In those 20 minutes, he opened the laptop 3 times and closed it 3 times. Each black screen showed him a brief reflection of his own face before the operating system lit up, and every reflection tightened the back of his neck, waiting for something to stand behind his shoulder. Patient as a wolf at the edge of firelight, Ben arrived wearing the face of a man who had already prepared a scolding. White shirt wrinkled at the stomach, employee badge clipped in his pocket, dark circles beneath his eyes. He still looked neater than Evan in a way that irritated Evan. As if a life could be ironed flat if it agreed to go to work on time. Beside Ben's right index finger was a small patch of peeled skin, and Evan noticed it immediately. Ben only chewed at his hands during months when agency deadlines ground their teeth in his sleep. Ben had entered adulthood more successfully than Evan, but not more cleanly. His agency sold brand stories to companies that wanted sincerity in an approved font. He managed designers younger than Evan, people who spoke in metrics, mood boards, conversion rates, and phrases that could make any pain sound like a marketing campaign. He had a mortgage spreadsheet, a daughter who liked bear-shaped pancakes, and a Slack status glowing green far too long after work hours. Stability did not make him less tired. It only gave his exhaustion dental insurance. Evan had once mocked that life as surrender. Now, watching Ben set 2 coffees down on the table and hide a yawn behind the back of his hand, Evan felt an old jealousy rise in his chest. Not hot enough to become anger, only warm enough to smolder like embers buried beneath wet ash. Ben sat down. "You look like a warning poster about freelancing." Evan did not answer. He turned the laptop toward Ben, but the hand holding the edge of it was so stiff his knuckles had gone white, as if coated in wax. "I need you to look at this, but don't open the original file." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Why? Just don't." Evan had prepared a video recorded from his phone screen. He did not send the file, did not copy the image, did not let anything leave the device in the ordinary sense. He had only filmed the folder opening and part of the README, covering most of the photograph with his hand, revealing the metadata, file name, creation time, and the things he thought were still safe enough for another person to see. Ben watched it to the end. The mockery left his face like paint, scraped away by a thin blade. At first, Ben watched with his familiar squint, the squint that meant he was preparing to diagnose Evan's stupidity. But then the video reached the file creation time, the album backing itself up. The corner of the image Evan had failed to cover completely, where the damp wall of his apartment appeared from an angle that should not exist. By the end, Ben's mouth had pressed into a straight line. He did not look like a man who had come to believe the impossible. He looked like a man annoyed by evidence because it refused to fit inside a reasonable shape. "Which platform?" Evan told him. "Show me the job." The job was still there, $1,200 in escrow. The deadline had passed, but the status did not show overdue. Instead, a gray line read, "Phase 1 completed." M05 restoration was offline. There were no new messages after the instruction to open the 5th photograph. Ben checked the profile. "This is weird. I've never seen verification this clean with no company data. Fake?" Anything can be faked if someone has enough time and skill. But the money is real. Ben tapped his nail against the escrow line, a dry, small sound that made Evan's own fingertip hurt in sympathy. "This isn't a cheap troll. Malware? Maybe. Give me the laptop. I'll take it to my company's AI tie and have them scan it." "No." Evan shook his head too quickly. Tightening the skin at the back of his neck as if it had been pulled by an iron hook. "It stays with me." Ben looked at him. "You think there's a ghost in there?" Evan wanted to snap back immediately, but the sentence hung between them, longer than was safe. He looked down into the plastic coffee cup, watched foam dissolve on the pale brown surface, white rings breaking apart like thin skin over hot milk. "I think someone is messing with me, and they know too much. Your room isn't hard to know. You've streamed edits. You've posted photos of your workspace. Delivery people know your address. A webcam can be hit with malware. Backups can sync. And the matching timestamp? Metadata can be edited. The dialog box in my software, script, plugin, malware." Ben tapped 3 fingers on the table, 1 beat at a time, as if naming enough possibilities would make the world stand upright again. "You need sleep, and you need to stop taking dirty jobs." Ben regretted the last phrase before the air had even carried it away. Evan saw it in the slight shift of his eyes, in the way Ben's thumb found the peeled skin beside his nail. Ben could be cruel by accident, because the truth often fell out of his mouth before compassion had time to color correct it. Evan both hated and envied that. Dirty jobs. Those 2 words did not point only to last night. They opened a drawer both of them had learned not to touch. Evan looked at Ben. "What do you mean?" Ben's eyes dropped at once. "Nothing. No. You're talking about 3 years ago." Ben went silent. The cafe was still noisy, but their table seemed to have been overturned beneath glass. A blender screamed behind the counter. A barista called an order number. Metal spoons clicked against cups. All those sounds retreated, leaving behind a dense, cold space, like water under the frozen skin of a lake. Ben was the only person who knew about the car Evan had erased from the accident photo. Not because Evan had soberly confessed, but because one drunken night in his old apartment, he had cried, opened the original file, and asked again and again whether a blurred detail counted as evidence if no one could prove what it was. Ben had not answered. He had closed the laptop, made lemon water, and sat beside Evan until morning. 2 days later, Ben told him to delete the original file. "It won't help anyone. Keeping it will only make you lose your mind." That night had never fully ended. It had only been filed under friendship, where men stored things they did not have the language to survive. Evan remembered Ben sitting on the floor beside him, back against the sofa, hands wrapped around a glass of water, saying nothing while dawn diluted the room. He remembered the original file open on the laptop. The road, the flash, the left edge, where the black car slipped half its body out of history. He remembered asking, "If I don't know for sure, does it count as lying?" Ben had stared at the screen for a long time, then said, "I don't know." That was the only honest answer either of them had that week. Evan had listened. Since then, a shadow had sat between them, and neither of them had brightened it. Ben kept helping him as before. Evan kept accepting the help as before. Both of them knew that part of their friendship was built on looking away. Looking away had become their shared profession. Ben did it by changing the subject, buying dinner, joking about the degeneracy of freelance life. Evan did it by accepting help with irritation, as if resentment could cover gratitude. Both knew the accident lived beneath the floorboards. Some nights it creaked. Most nights, they turned the TV louder. Now M05 Restoration had found that floorboard and slipped a finger under the edge. "I don't blame you," Ben said. "But you remember." "Of course I remember. That's enough." Ben laced his fingers together. "Listen to me. Let me scan the machine. Report the account. If we need to, report it to cybercrime. Don't handle this alone." Evan looked out the glass door. A red car passed, spraying dirty water up onto the curb, leaving behind a dark smear like blood mixed with mud. In the reflection behind Ben for 1 second, Evan saw someone standing near the door. Tall, narrow, head tilted. "Do not turn around," he told himself. "If there's nothing there, you're crazy. If there is, you're dead." He turned. No one. Only an employee wiping a table, blue cloth in hand, face lowered, posture exhausted like everyone working a morning shift while not yet fully awake. Ben leaned forward. What? Nothing. Evan's phone vibrated with a new email. No subject. Sender. M05 Restoration. The body contained only one line. This person trusts you. One attachment. Evan did not open it. The thumbnail was enough. Ben sat across from him in the cafe, hand wrapped around a plastic cup, face tilted slightly. Behind Ben, in the reflection of the glass door, a black shadow stood very close to his shoulder. The photograph had been taken from a height no customer in the cafe could have. It captured the milk steamer behind the counter, the barista's hand blurred in motion, a cyclist outside trapped in the window reflection. Every detail was ordinary except the most important one. That was its cruelty. It did not build a nightmare from imagination. It infected a breakfast table. Ben did not look at the black shadow. He looked at Evan with the defensive patience of a friend still waiting to be trusted. This person trusts you. The sentence tightened around the photograph until Evan felt accused by his own body. Throat closing, chest locked by a cold ring of chain, stomach sliding low, palms hidden under the table, suddenly wet and cold, as if he had touched the inside of a dead fish. Day 1. Denial. Evan did not tell Ben about the email. He did not know why. Maybe because if he said it out loud, Ben would make them open it together. Maybe because the line, "This person trusts you," carried an insult so private it made him ashamed, as if he had been stripped in the street. Maybe because for the first time since this began, Evan understood that whatever controlled the sequence of images was not only looking through cameras, not only crawling through webcams, cloud sync, metadata, or the technical wires he had once believed he could untangle one by one. It was looking through relationships. It knew who stood closest to the softest wound in him. He also kept silent because some small, filthy part of him wanted to keep Ben unmarked for a few more minutes. The email had made Ben a candidate, but by hiding it, Evan could pretend that candidacy had not begun. Silence gave him a false delay. Evan had used false delays all his life. After the next job, after the next payment, after the next morning, after everything became easier to explain. He turned the phone face down on the tabletop. The screen glowed briefly beneath the wood, as if the hidden image inside it still gave off heat, silent and hot as embers under skin. It is looking through the people you love. It knows who has been placed nearest the knife. Evan pretended to have a headache and stood up first. At the door, Ben caught his sleeve. The lie was so pathetic it needed no skill. Evan only had to touch his temple, lower his eyes, and Ben supplied the rest of the concern himself. That was how trust worked. It helped the liar carry the lie away. Evan hated Ben for making it too easy. Outside, morning traffic dragged itself through puddles. The city did not know that a new photograph had already chosen its subject. It still honked, ordered coffee, checked calendars, got irritated by 9 o'clock meetings. Indifference had never looked so luxurious. "I'll come over tonight," Ben said. "No, I'm not asking. Don't come." Ben studied him harder. "What are you afraid I'll see?" Evan did not answer. He stepped into the morning crowd. The busier Seattle became, the more isolated he felt, like a wounded animal running inside a herd, and none of them smelling the blood. The people brushing past him did not know. His phone held a photograph that had arrived by itself. The woman crossing against the light did not know he was counting 3 days from the moment he had seen the back of his own neck on a screen. A girl fixing her hair in a shop window had no idea. There were things inside images that did not wait to be named before they began moving. When he returned to the apartment, Evan did not turn on the PC. He took yellow-handled pliers and snapped the webcam, the crack of plastic dry as a fishbone broken between 2 fingers. He tore the USB end off, threw it into the black trash bag with the dried noodle cup, and stood watching it lie there among organic waste and cigarette ash. Small, harmless, powerless enough to be even less trustworthy. He turned off photo sync on his phone, signed out of the cloud, changed his email password to a string so long he had to write it on the back of a cigarette pack. Bought antivirus software he had once mocked as a tax on the gullible. Full scan. Nothing serious beyond a few old cracked plugins. He attacked the problem like a man building walls out of materials he did not truly believe in. Two-factor authentication. New recovery email. Router reset. Browser cache deletion. External hard drives unplugged. Every access permission on his phone reviewed. Camera access was turned off for every app except the ones that would die if they could not see. Each dialog box asking, "Are you sure?" made him angrier. No, he thought, the muscles in his jaw tightening until they hurt. I've never been sure of anything in my life. The antivirus progress bar crawled with theatrical slowness. Evan watched it pass through folders named after clients who had forgotten him. Projects that would never pay, personal backups he had not opened in years. Threats found. 0. The result should have comforted him. Instead, it removed another door from the room, leaving him more exposed than before. He reset the router, changed the Wi-Fi password, downloaded login logs from the freelance app. Every access came from his IP. He told the landlord that something had been stolen, so he could ask to see the hallway camera. From 1 to 4 in the morning, no one went up to the 3rd floor. No one stood outside his door. No one entered. In the hallway footage, his apartment door sat still like a clenched mouth. The hallway camera was mounted over the laundry alcove, at an ugly angle, night vision, turning anyone who passed into white fish drifting underwater. Evan watched the footage twice, then a 3rd time. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent light flickered slightly. A moth threw itself against the bulb. His door sat at the end of the frame, the 3B number peeling at one corner. At 2 hours 3 minutes and 17 seconds, the video jerked for less than a second. Not enough to lose the image. Not enough to accuse. The timestamp hiccuped and continued. Evan rewound. The landlord complained that he had other tenants. Evan watched it again anyway. The landlord looked at him with suspicion. You look like hell. Deadline. Smoke less. Your room smells like it almost caught fire. Evan thanked him and went upstairs. Outside his door, a strip of black electrical tape was stuck to the stained tile floor, the very strip that had fallen from the webcam. He remembered throwing it in the trash. Now it lay in the hallway, adhesive side up, gathering dust, hair, and one dried grain of rice, as if someone had peeled it off from the other side. Evan picked it up. The adhesive was cold and wet, not like glue, like new skin over a wound. He threw it into the toilet and flushed twice. By evening, after finding no technical explanation, Evan did what panicked people did when reason ran out. He searched the internet. He hated the internet at moments like this, because it always had answers, and almost never had the truth. It gave him forums where lonely people turned fear into folklore, debunking threads where smug men explained trauma as compression artifacts, video essays with red circles drawn around darkness, archive posts by people who had either lied very well or disappeared very truly. Evan opened tabs until the browser looked ill. Every search began technical and ended superstitious. He typed like an expert, then like a victim, then like a child asking whether monsters were real, but phrasing it so the algorithm would not laugh in his face. He typed phrase after phrase. Cursed image shadow restoration. JPG creates day 0 folder, blind frame 05, M05 restoration. 3 days 5 frames 1 blind spot. The first results were creepypasta forums, garbage videos, clickbait. Evan read them with contempt and dependence, like a dying man scorning the dirty cup he still drank from. Most told stories of cursed photographs. Open the file and an accident happens. Forward it to survive. Cheap formulas. Nothing like his case. Then he tried another cluster of terms. 5 frames, 1 blind spot. Make the next set in 3 days. Do not send image curse to strangers. On the 4th page of results, he found a cached post from a locked photography forum, 6 years old. Username: Nina Focus. Title: Has anyone ever taken a night photo restoration job with a brief asking you not to remove objects? The post described a high-paying restoration job. 5 photographs of an overpass at night. In the shadows, a person stood closer in each image. After she finished, a day 0 folder appeared and gave the 3-day rule. She asked if anyone knew whether it was a prank or a viral campaign. Nina's writing had the crisp, thin, brittle politeness of someone trying not to sound afraid. She listed file dimensions, lens data, platform details, and apologized for posting in the wrong subforum. She said she had tried disconnecting the internet. She said the folder had appeared on a machine that had never touched the original file. She said the worst part was not the figure in the image, but the way each new message knew whom she trusted. In a reply at 4:11 a.m., she wrote, "I keep thinking this is a test to see whether I will protect myself by hurting someone else." 8 minutes later, she edited the comment and removed that sentence. The cache preserved both versions. Most of the comments mocked her. One user told her to upload the files so everyone could look. Nina replied, "No, I don't think anyone else should open them." Her final comment appeared 3 days later. "I understand what the blind spot is now. I'm sorry, that account never posted again." Evan clicked the profile, Nina Hart, the same inactive account that had reviewed M05 restoration. He searched her name. An old local news article appeared. Freelance photographer missing after leaving studio. No clear conclusion. The photo in the article showed a short-haired woman with tired eyes, a camera strap around her neck. Evan zoomed in on the article image. On the studio wall behind her hung a black and white photograph of an overpass. The article was written in the language journalism used when it had no answers, but still needed to sound useful. Last seen, anyone with information please contact. Friends described her as dedicated. Family requests privacy. Those words floated over an absence they could not fill. Nina Hart had become a set of public facts without an ending. Evan looked at her face longer than he meant to. She did not look cursed. She looked tired, talented, and probably underpaid. She looked like someone who had waited too long before asking for help, because competence had trained her to treat fear as a problem she should solve alone. In the lower left corner of the article photo, very faintly, someone stood with their back turned. Evan closed the browser. The room was silent again. Night had fallen. A weak yellow streak from the apartment next door slipped through the gap in the window. He realized he had not eaten since the previous evening. His stomach contracted, but the sensation felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. His phone vibrated. "Ben, I bought soup. Be there in 20 minutes. Before Evan could type a reply, an email notification slid down. Day 1. No subject, no body, only one attachment. Evan knew not to open it. The thumbnail was already too clear. The hallway outside his apartment, shot from the far end. In front of his door stood a man with his back turned, wearing a wrinkled white shirt and an employee badge in his pocket. Ben. Time received. 7:42 p.m. Evan looked at the clock on his phone. 7:22 p.m. The photograph had been sent from 20 minutes in the future. Evan ran out of the apartment as if shoved by an invisible hand. The third-floor hallway was long and narrow, lit by a white fluorescent tube that hissed softly like a mosquito trapped in glass. The tile floor smelled of bleach. At the far end was the green-painted fire stairwell, and beyond it, the window overlooking the alley. No Ben, no one in front of his door. Only a neighbor's trash bag leaning against the wall, loosely tied, giving off the smell of sour rice, old sauce, and shrimp shells. The smell was so real, Evan clung to it like a handrail. Rot still belonged to the world. Rot still needed time to happen. He ran down the stairs. On the first floor, the convenience store below the building spilled sick white light onto the wet sidewalk. Brightly colored snack bags lined the glass. A young clerk leaned one elbow on the counter, chewing gum while looking at his phone. Outside, rain fell lightly, not enough to become a curtain, only enough to make every surface shine like fish skin. Evan stood beneath the awning, chest heaving, throat burning from the run. He wanted to call Ben, but his finger stopped on the screen, because if he heard Ben's voice on the way over, he would have to tell his friend to turn around. And if Ben asked why, Evan would have to talk about the photograph from the future, the hallway, the shape of Ben's back outside his door, the darkness choosing people by trust. The phone vibrated in his hand. "Ben, I'm downstairs. Where are you?" Evan snapped his head up. Ben's car was parked across the street, headlights yellow through the rain. Ben stepped out, one hand carrying a paper bag, the other pulling his collar up against the cold. He saw Evan under the awning and raised the bag like a minor trophy. "I bought soup. You're eating before you keep going crazy." The sentence was so ordinary Evan almost laughed, but the laugh caught in his throat like a fishbone. He crossed the street through the rain, shoes splashing cold water up around his ankles. Ben stood there, frowning when he saw Evan's face. "Why did you run downstairs?" "Don't go up, Evan. Don't go up to the third floor." Ben looked at him for longer. Under the convenience store light, his face was tired, real, warm in the clumsy way of someone who had left home at night, only because his friend sounded unwell. That moment made everything more frightening. If Ben had been an asshole, if he had abandoned Evan, if he were only a name in a contact list, the fear would have been easier to cut. But Ben stood there with hot soup in his hand, thin steam escaping through the mouth of the paper bag, and that ordinary kindness made Evan feel his chest crack silently, without a sound. Ben held up the paper bag. "The soup's getting cold. There's a photo of you outside my door." Evan spoke fast, each word knocking against his teeth. "It says 7:42. It's only 7:22. Ben did not laugh. That was what made Evan want to sit down on the ground. Ben only lowered the soup bag slowly, looking at him like someone hearing a crack run across lake ice and trying to decide whether to keep walking. "Show me. Don't open the original file. Thumbnail only." Evan handed him the phone. Ben looked. The color did not drain from his face all at once like in movies. It withdrew bit by bit, like an image with its saturation pulled too far down. He looked at the clock on Evan's phone, then at his own watch, then at the third floor hallway, through the cloudy glass of the building entrance. Timestamp could be spoofed. "Ben, I know." Ben handed the phone back, but his hand touched Evan's a little longer than necessary, one warm and human instant that almost hurt Evan. "I know." Rain touched the awning with cold fingertips. From the convenience store came the sound of the air conditioner, the gentle tremble of the drink cooler, the smell of hot dogs turning too long under red bulbs, mixing with wet plastic and gasoline. The city continued exaggerating ordinary things to reassure them, but between Evan and Ben, an invisible passage had opened, narrow, dark, slick as a python's throat. "So what do we do?" Evan asked. Ben looked up at the third floor. "Don't let it have the right frame." "What?" "If the picture shows me standing outside your door at 7:42, then I won't stand there at 7:42. The sentence was so simple it was almost insulting, but Evan seized it at once. Don't let it have the right frame. Not solve the curse, not understand the demon, only break the composition. A small piece of logic, cold and sharp, like a razor blade tucked under the tongue. They did not go upstairs. They sat in the convenience store at the plastic table by the window, under white lights that made everything look ill. Ben set the soup in front of Evan. Evan wanted to eat, wanted to prove his body still belonged to a world with salt, broth, and plastic spoons, but when he opened the lid, steam rose smelling of chicken, pepper, and dried onion, and his stomach recoiled like an animal kicked in the belly. "Eat," Ben said. "I can't swallow." "Then hold it in your mouth. Your body needs to remember. It isn't dead." Evan looked at him. "Do you hear yourself sounding like a discount therapist?" "Agency made me take a burnout workshop. I'm professionally great at turning suffering into bullet points." The joke was bad, very bad, but it was Ben's, and because of that, for 1 second, Evan felt his eyes heat in a dangerous way. He lowered his head, scooped up a spoonful of soup, and put it in his mouth. The broth was salty, warm, too real, sliding over his tongue like a reminder that if horror wanted to exist, it still had to pass through a body that needed food. At 7:42 p.m., they were still sitting inside the convenience store. Ben was not standing outside Evan's apartment door. Evan watched the clock turn to 7:43, then 7:44. Nothing happened. No explosion, no screen lighting up, no black shadow pouring down the glass. Only a customer buying cigarettes, the clerk scanning them, the rustle of a plastic bag. Ben exhaled. "See?" Evan wanted to believe, but inside his ribs, a part of him still lay motionless, ear pressed to the ground, listening to something moving far away. They went up to the apartment at 8:10. The third-floor hallway was empty. In front of door 3B, on the tile where Ben should have stood in the photograph, was a wet footprint. Only one, smaller than Ben's foot, like the print of a barefoot person who had stood there for a very long time. Ben bent to look. Evan stood beside him, throat thickening again, the bleach smell of the hallway mixing with the soup in the paper bag, and some hot metal smell from the old outlet, making the air close and faintly rancid, as if the whole floor had been holding its breath beneath its skin. "Don't touch it," Evan said. "Wasn't planning to." They entered the room. Evan turned on every light, the ceiling light, desk lamp, tiny kitchen light, even the phone screen, as if light were iron bars that could brace a door. The apartment was dirty, cramped, far too bright. The dark corners did not vanish. They only retreated, thinner now, standing close to the edges of objects, patient as wild animals driven from a campfire. Ben set the soup bag on the table, took off his coat, and looked around. He did not criticize the mess the way he usually did. That bothered Evan more than criticism would have. "Where's the Pikesea?" "Unplugged." "Router?" "Password changed." "Webcam?" "Broken." "Good." Ben took a notebook and pen from his bag and set them on the desk. A car passed through the alley and faded away. Ben wrote a timeline. Job at 2 am, 5 images. Day 0, future photograph, day 1 on the phone. Evan watched the neat bullet points and almost laughed. Human beings believed that once events were placed into a list, they became less insane. Ben's handwriting was square and impatient. He wrote like building a fence: time, event, evidence, possible explanation. Evan watched him leave the right margin for causes: malware, stalker, platform exploit, shared cloud sync. Then, after a while in silence, Ben drew a line and wrote, unknown. Unknown looked smaller on paper than it felt in the room. That was why people took notes during disasters. Not because notes saved them, because notes gave horror somewhere to stand. Ben asked to read the README file. Evan handed him the screenshot on his phone. Ben stopped at the line. "Do not send it to a stranger." "It wants a receiver," Ben said. Evan looked at the dead Pikesea. "It wants someone who trusts me." Receiver sounded technical until it was spoken aloud. Then it became intimate. A receiver was not only an email address. A receiver was someone willing to accept a message as something meant for them, willing to believe the sender meant no harm. Trust was the transmission protocol. Ben looked down at the floor. Evan knew what he was thinking, because the thought had already passed through him. If trust was the channel, then the history between them had become infrastructure. Ben said nothing. The word trust sat between them, with Ben's name written on it. Evan wanted to say no, wanted to grab Ben by the shoulders and push him out of this story. Wanted to say, you have a wife, a child, a house, something to go home to, while I only have invoices, corrupted folders, and an old shadow in my hard drive. But the words stuck, because if he said them aloud, they would sound like a confession of love in the ugliest possible way. Not romantic, not bright, only the bare truth that there were people one did not want to lose, even after spending one's life using them as a place to pour off guilt. Ben closed the notebook. I'm sleeping here. No. No again? It's choosing you. Then I'm even less willing to leave you alone. Ben. Evan. Ben's voice hardened, but under it was something warm and smoldering, like a hand held near a stove. You called me. I came. Don't turn me staying into your fault. Evan looked at him, and something in his chest tightened with a pain almost tender. He wanted to argue, but his body no longer had the strength to build one more wall. His knees hollowed out. His shoulders dropped. The fear, after a whole day of being caged by technical procedures, finally found a crack to flow through, thick and dark as hot asphalt. Ben slept on the iron bed. Evan sat on the floor, back against the wall, the powered-down laptop in front of him like a tied animal. They did not turn off the lights. The smells of cold soup, old smokes, damp clothing, and hot plastic mingled. Every few minutes, Evan looked at the broken webcam lying in the trash, the outlet, the closet gap, Ben's shadow falling across the wall. Ben had turned toward the inside of the room, one hand out from beneath the blanket, the small patch of peeled skin still visible on one finger. That man had known what Evan had erased from a photograph, had sat beside him on the most cowardly night of his life, had chosen not to leave despite knowing. That made Ben both trustworthy and dangerous, like a candle placed too close to a curtain, warm, necessary, and capable of burning down the whole room if darkness blew in the right direction. Close to 3 a.m, when the rain outside had thinned into a silver murmur, Ben's phone lit up on the table. Evan saw it before Ben woke. A new email. No subject. Sender. M05 Restoration. The attachment name showed in the notification. blind-frame-01_ben.jpg. For one long second, Evan did not touch the phone. He only sat there, back against the cold wall, feeling every vertebra rise like fur before a storm. Then, from inside the trash can, the broken webcam made a very small click. The broken webcam made a very small click. The sound was no louder than a fingernail touching the side of a glass, but in the room blazing with white light until it hurt the eyes, it cut through Evan's skin like a cold wire pulled taut between two teeth. He did not turn his head immediately, because there were moments when the body understood before the mind that seeing a dead object move was worse than hearing it move. And for an instant brief enough to be called cowardice, Evan only sat still, feeling each vertebra lift like the fur of a wolf caught in headlights in the middle of a road. Ben heard it too. His eyes opened, though perhaps he had never been deeply asleep. The hand outside the blanket tightened, fingers stiff as if they had touched the edge of a blade. Both of them looked toward the trash can, where the black piece of webcam lay among the dried noodle cup, cigarette ash, crumpled tissues, a tiny plastic corpse that should no longer have had the right to give any command to the world. It's not that, Ben said, but his voice was so hoarse and low the denial sounded like a plea. Evan wanted to answer, wanted to tell him not to speak, as if not naming it would keep it from hearing, but his lips were dry, his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. The smell of cold soup and hot plastic thickening in the room like poisoned honey. He stood too quickly, knees almost buckling, then moved toward the trash in short steps, not out of courage, but because fear sometimes took the form of curiosity. A filthy curiosity that pulled people toward the hole, the way the eye was drawn into a python's mouth. The webcam did not move again, only the cracked shell, the snapped USB end, a small wire sticking out like a black tendon. Evan bent down, the sour smell of trash rising up. Real, vulgar, almost redemptive. But beneath it lay a thin, cold streak of damp metal. The smell he had detected in the fourth image, rust resting at the back of his tongue like blood from a cracked tooth. Ben sat up. Evan. Evan did not answer. Evan, look at me. He turned. Ben sat on the iron bed. Hair mussed, shirt wrinkled, one shoe half slipped off, looking nothing like a hero in any story. He looked only like a tired man who had come, because his friend called, bringing soup, a laptop, stubbornness, and the clumsy kindness Evan wanted both to cling to and shove away, like pushing a candle back from a curtain already catching fire. On the desk, Ben's laptop was still open. The screen should have been showing system logs. Now, on Ben's desktop, between company software icons and a folder named Q3 Brand Assets, sat a new folder. Day 1. Evan felt the air being pulled out of his lungs in one silent motion, as if someone had laid a cold hand over his chest and pressed down. He could not speak at once, only stared at that folder, pale yellow, aligned to the grid, polite, tidy, ordinary to the point of disgust. Ben followed his gaze. For 1 second, Ben's expression did not change. Then his jaw tightened, a line of tension ran through the corner of his eye, and the whole room seemed to hear his body understand what had happened before his mouth could ask. "What?" Ben said. Evan swallowed. His throat hurt as if he had swallowed iron thorns. "A folder." Ben stood. "What folder?" "Day 1, on your laptop." The air thickened. Ben did not ask Evan whether he was sure. Evan's face no longer had room for doubt, only the pale grey of a man backed against the wall by evidence. Ben stepped to the desk, put one hand on the laptop lid, and Evan lunged faster, almost grabbing his wrist. "Don't." Ben looked at Evan's hand clamped around him. "Open it. No. Open it. It wants you to open it. It may have copied through the local network. I have to look. You don't understand." Evan heard his own voice crack, low and urgent. "It's pulling you in." Ben stood straighter, and in that posture was the stubbornness that had kept him beside Evan for years. A warm, rough, dangerous stubbornness, like an ember tucked inside a sleeve. "Evan, I understand that you're scared, but if you treat everything as part of the chain, you hand all control to it. Open it." Evan kept the laptop closed. Ben looked down at his hand. "Don't make me into a child you have to protect." The sentence struck because it was fair. Evan's fear had begun making decisions on behalf of everyone near him. He wanted to lock Ben outside, hide the evidence, delete messages, choose silence, and name all of that protection. The same way 3 years ago he had told himself erasing the black car from the edge of the photograph was to prevent misunderstanding, reduce confusion, keep things cleaner for people who did not need to know. Protection was also a word that could rot if held too long in the palm. So Evan let go. Ben opened the laptop, kept Wi-Fi off, and did not open the image. He checked properties, timestamp, permissions, path, access logs. The more he looked, the more color left his face, not blanching white, but draining slowly of life, like a portrait whose saturation had been pulled down until only skin and truth remained. "No process created it," Ben said. "No copy log. No network event. Because it's not. Don't." Ben cut him off, voice dry. "I haven't said that word." "Ghost?" Evan laughed once, but the laugh fell to the floor like blunt metal. "I said I haven't." They sat across from each other in the small room. Outside, the building slept its moldy sleep of old concrete. Somewhere behind the wall, someone coughed, spat into a sink, then flushed water. A car passed through the alley, its headlights sliding across the curtain and disappearing. Ben took out his notebook and wrote the timeline. Job at 2 in the morning, 5 photographs, days 0, future image, day 1 on his laptop. Evan watched the orderly bullet points and almost wanted to laugh. Human beings believed that if events were placed in a list, they became less insane. Ben's handwriting was square, hurried, slightly slanted, as if each stroke were a small iron bar driven into soft ground. Time, event, evidence, possible explanation. Evan watched Ben leave the right margin for causes: malware, stalker, platform exploit, shared cloud sync. Then, after a long pause, Ben drew a line and wrote, "Unknown." Unknown looked smaller on paper than it felt in the room. That was why people took notes in disasters. Not because notes saved them, but because notes gave horror a place to stand. A small box on paper, instead of letting it crawl all over the ceiling, like a spider whose legs could not be seen. Ben asked to reread the README file. Evan handed him the screenshot on the phone, and Ben stopped at the line. "Do not send it to a stranger. It wants a receiver," Ben said. Evan looked at the dead PC, then at the trash can where the webcam lay still, too still to be trustworthy. "It wants someone who trusts me." Receiver sounded technical until spoken aloud. Then it became intimate enough to nauseate. A receiver was not just an address field. A receiver was someone willing to receive a thing as if it had been sent correctly to them. Willing to believe the sender meant no harm. Willing to open the door because they recognized the voice outside. Trust was the transmission protocol. Ben looked at the floor. Evan knew what he was thinking, because the thought had already passed through him. If trust was the channel, then the history between them had become infrastructure. Ben said nothing. The word trust sat between them with Ben's name on it. By near morning, they no longer had the strength to pretend this belonged only to machines. Evan lay on the bed but did not sleep. Ben slumped over the desk, head tilted to one side, laptop open before him, cold log lines glowing on his skin. The room lights had been turned off at some point, though neither of them remembered doing it. Only the laptop glow, the phone glow, the rain light reflected on glass remained. Small, weak sources of light like candles placed in the mouth of the wind. Evan dozed into a dream without clear images. In the dream, he was editing a photograph of his room, but each time he dragged the brush across it, something disappeared. The bed vanished. The ashtray vanished. Ben sleeping at the desk became a blur, and then a clean wall. At the end, only the cursor remained, hovering over the place Evan should have been sitting, a bright needle point in the empty space. He tried to scream from inside the dream, but the sound opened into a dialogue box. He woke at 2:03. The room was dark. Ben slept folded over the desk, laptop still open. On Ben's desktop, the Day 1 folder was still there, but this time it was no longer empty. Inside was a photograph. Trust_v1.jpg. The thumbnail showed Evan asleep on the bed. Ben sat at the desk, back turned. Behind Ben, in the darkness beside the wall, a hand rested on his shoulder. It was intimate in a way the earlier photographs had never been. The hand did not squeeze, pull, or tear. It simply rested there, possessing, familiar, almost comforting, if the viewer did not understand what was touching him. That tenderness made Evan want to smash the screen. Violence could at least be named. This was like a claim of ownership. Ben in the thumbnail looked tired and defenseless, head lowered toward the laptop, one shoe half off. A man helping his friend. A man who had stepped into someone else's nightmare because friendship had taught him that showing up was the right thing. The hand was not clear, only a long gray smear of noise, but its fingernails touched Ben's collar. Evan yanked the power cord from Ben's laptop before he could think. The screen snapped black. Ben jerked awake, almost falling out of the chair. "What the hell? It's on your machine too." Ben took a few seconds to understand. He looked at the cord in Evan's hand, then at the dark screen. What was there? Day 1, one picture. It was touching your shoulder. The last sentence came out of Evan's mouth smaller than he wanted, and the moment it touched the air, the room seemed to drop another layer colder. Ben lifted his hand to his shoulder by instinct, touching the exact spot from the thumbnail, then went rigid. Not because it hurt, but because flesh sometimes reacted to the memory of a hand that had never truly rested there. "Turn it on," Ben said. "No, Evan, it's using you. It's using the fact that you're scared for me. Ben looked at him, eyes red from lack of sleep, but his voice was calm in a way that made Evan want to hit him. Those are not the same thing. Evan wanted to argue. But inside his chest, something heavy and black had just crawled across his ribs, leaving behind cold like riverbed mud. Ben was right, and right sentences always hurt more than accusations because they left no place to hide. By noon the next day, Evan was at Mara Wells's studio. Mara had once been Evan's girlfriend. She shot documentary photography, hated skin retouched until it was smooth as plastic, hated colors that turned human faces into product packaging. She had once said, a good photograph was not a clean photograph, but one that did not fear the truth. Evan had loved her partly for that sentence, and hated her for the same reason. Because there were people who spoke about truth so calmly that anyone who had lived by softening truth wanted to cover their mouth with a hand. Mara came from the opposite religion of images. Evan believed a photograph was raw material. Mara believed it was a promise, not a promise of honesty. She had never been that naive, but a promise to wrestle with what had once stood before the lens. When they were together, they argued in bed about skin texture, argued over takeout about ethics, argued over whether a photographer owed the subject mercy or accuracy. They called those arguments intimacy until they became evidence. Mara had once photographed a protest in the rain and refused to crop out a police officer laughing in the background, because she said that laugh belonged to the image. Back then, Evan admired her. Later, he began to fear anyone who could say belonged with such certainty. After the accident, Mara realized he was hiding something. She did not ask many questions. She only looked through a few files on his computer, sat very still for a long time, then placed one hand on the desk and said, "You're not editing photographs anymore. You're editing consequences for other people." They broke up after that sentence. Her studio was on the second floor of an old brick building in Fremont, behind a green metal door with a lock that stuck unless you lifted it slightly. It did not resemble the glossy wedding studios Evan usually retouched. No silk backdrops, no ring lights, no fake antique chairs, no perfume trying to make money look romantic. Only grey walls, scratched tripods, an old light table, expired Ilford film, an Epson scanner, and a dark room behind a heavy black curtain. The air smelled of chemicals, damp paper, reheated coffee, and the old cold that lived in rooms where too many faces had been washed out of darkness. Mara opened the door for them in a loose grey sweater, hair tied low, eyes bare of makeup. She looked at Ben first, then Evan. Did not ask why he had come. Did not look surprised. That hurt Evan more than if she had slammed the door. "You look like a file saved wrong," she said. Ben glanced at Evan. "I'm starting to like her." Mara did not laugh. She looked at the laptop in Ben's hand, then Evan's phone, and finally her eyes stopped on his face, exactly under the eyes where he had always brightened his own photographs. What happened? Evan had thought he would prepare a clean report. Chronology, files, client, Nina Hart, day 0, Ben. But, standing in front of Mara, every sentence he had sharpened that morning melted like wax near flame. His body remembered her before his mind did. The chemical smell on her wrists, her voice when tired, the way she kept silent when she knew someone was lying, even the feeling of being seen through in places he had cloned too carefully. He wanted to say, "I need your help." But the word need caught because it had hooks, so he said, "Something is using photographs to choose people." Mara looked at him for one more second, then stepped back to let them in. The room received them with the smell of fixer and paper dust, grey light from the high window, the wheezing of an old heater in the corner. Everything here seemed slower than Evan's apartment, as if Mara's studio did not believe in the speed of clouds. The convenience of backup, the promise that everything could be preserved forever if the servers lived. "Don't open any file directly," Evan said the instant he stepped inside. Mara shut the door. "I'm not stupid. The sentence was ordinary, sharp, familiar enough that Evan almost smiled, and that almost made his stomach hurt. Some pieces of old love never died completely. They only went cold, lying somewhere under the skin like broken needles, aching again when the other person spoke in exactly the right voice. Mara rolled out a whiteboard, set 3 chairs around the table, and handed Evan a marker. "Tell it from the beginning. Don't edit the story to make it easier to hear," Evan told her. He told her about the 203 job, the 5 dark images, the figure moving closer, the 5th image capturing the back of his neck, the tape falling, day 0, read me, the album backing itself up, Nina Hart, Ben's photograph, the day 1 folder on Ben's laptop. Ben filled in details in a dry voice, trying to keep everything within the realm of investigation. But when they reached the part about the hand on his shoulder, he paused, touched his collar, then lowered his hand as if offended by his own gesture. Mara wrote very little. Mostly, she listened. When Evan mentioned Nina Hart, her hand stopped entirely. That name had weight in her world. The public remembered missing people through headlines, a few profile pictures, a few days of shared links, then forgot. Photographers remembered differently. The gear found in a car, the final exhibition, contact sheets not fully developed, a studio locked from the outside, rolls of film lying silent in a refrigerator, like sentences never spoken. "Nina Hart," Mara repeated. "You knew her?" "Knew the name." Mara set the pen down. "Everyone in the field knows that name in a way no one wants to." When Evan reached the accident, Mara interrupted him. "Client name." Evan looked at her. In his stomach, something coiled like a snake whose tail had been touched. Vance Pruitt Consulting. Mara wrote it down. Vance Pruitt was the man in the white shirt, the one who had paid Evan to erase the black car. His company still existed, shinier now, sponsoring business panels and urban technology awards. Its website filled with photographs of glass offices, smiling people, and hands clasped under clean light where it never rained. The website called him a strategic communications consultant, a phrase polished so smooth it no longer admitted its actual meaning. Crisis handling, reputation repair, arrangement of public memory, turning pressure into management theory. Evan had learned to fear people who could make threats sound like advice. On the About page, Pruitt stood beside a window with the skyline behind him, one hand in his pocket, mouth arranged into empathy. The photograph was professionally shot. Evan saw the retouch immediately. Softened under eyes, reduced neck folds, the corner of the mouth lifted slightly. Someone like Evan had made him look trustworthy. After listening, Mara said, "Show me everything without opening the images directly." She used an analog camera to photograph the screen, preserving thumbnails, metadata, and the text file. She covered thumbnails with paper, wrote down hash values, printed screenshots through an offline process. It did not make them safe. It made them less helpless. Mara treated the room like a contaminated lab. She taped the laptop camera with gaffer tape, then taped a piece of card over it, as if since last night adhesive itself had become untrustworthy in principle. She asked Ben to read timestamps aloud, while she wrote them by hand. She photographed the screen on film, because film could burn, be hidden, stolen, soaked, ruined. But after the shutter closed, no one could edit it remotely. Evan had once mocked her for clinging to analog evidence like a fossil. Now the click of her camera sounded like a lock sliding shut. "Don't romanticize this," Mara said when she saw his face. "Film lies too. It just lies more slowly." That was Mara. Even comfort arrived with a correction. Near noon, an email from Evan's own account arrived on Mara's laptop. Mara read the subject. "Could you brighten this for me?" The attachment was named Blind Frame Request. Mara did not open it. She called him first. Now the file sat in the inbox like an insect sealed under glass. The email preview showed only the first line. It was enough. Only you can see it. Evan closed his eyes. When they were together, He had sent Mara difficult edits with that exact line. Only you can see what's fake here. Only you can see where the lie is. Mara always could. The curse did not merely imitate his voice. It chose the softest sentence. It did not come to Mara in machine language, not through metadata, not through a yellow folder. It came in the language of someone she had once loved, in a sentence that had since lain between them, during late nights at work. Both of them bent over a screen, shoulders touching, coffee cold beside them. The outside world far enough away for truth to resemble a kind of intimacy. Evan felt his face grow hot, not with simple shame, but with a barbed shame, the kind that burrowed into the skin when a beautiful memory was used as a key. "Delete it," Ben said. "Wait," Mara replied. Evan looked at her. "Mara, not because I want to open it." She extended one hand, palm down as if keeping an animal from leaping off the table. "Because panic ruins chain of custody." Ben let out a short, humorless laugh. "Did you really just say chain of custody about a cursed email?" Mara looked at him. "If it wants us to act like panicked people, then we won't give it that luxury." Evan wanted to say that her calm was also a form of arrogance, that not everything could be set on a table, labeled, photographed on film, classified, and sealed. But he looked at her hand, saw a small scratch on her index knuckle, the short nails, the silver ring she still wore on her middle finger, the ring he had once turned with his thumb while they lay beside each other. And every objection fell into his stomach like cold stones. Mara did not open the attachment. She photographed the preview, printed the header, wrote down the time, then turned off the laptop's Wi-Fi. For the next few minutes, the room held only the sound of paper running through the printer, the scrape of pen in a notebook, Ben breathing heavily through his nose, and Evan's heart beating slowly but painfully, each pulse like something heavy falling into black water. Then Ben's laptop lit up by itself. No one touched it. A new file appeared inside the Day 1 folder. Next sequence edit. The file name blinked once. Mara set down the camera. Ben opened his mouth, then closed it. Evan felt his throat dry out, as if all the water in his body had been drawn toward the screen. "Don't open it," he said. But the file opened itself. The screen showed an unclear frame, most of it still dark. But in the center, an image was slowly appearing, like a face beneath cloudy ice. Ben looking at the email in the breakfast cafe, color withdrawn from his face, fingers near the screen. Evan sat opposite, only half his body in frame. Mara was using a tissue to cover part of the screen. The photograph had been taken from above, through an awning or a non-existent camera. Beneath the image was a caption, "Approach completed. Frame 2. Trust pending." Ben looked at it. "It counts me not opening it as part of the process," Mara said very softly. "Trust is not always opening immediately. Trust is staying." That sentence condemned all of them. Ben stayed. Mara stayed. The longer they stayed, the clearer they became in the frame. The more they believed they could save Evan, the more qualified they became to receive the file. For the first time, Evan understood why Nina Hart had apologized in her final comment. Not because she had done something monstrous from the start. Because every possible path began demanding another person. Leave, and the image sequence would speak in your voice. Stay, and your presence became material. Ask for help, and help became the target. Refuse help, and isolation sharpened the knife. A curse was easy to fear. A system that turned care into a weakness was harder, because care was also the only reason they had not lost one another yet. Evan closed the laptop. "I'm leaving." Ben blocked the door. "Where?" "Away from you." "That won't help. At least, I won't sit here and watch you get pulled into frame by frame. If you leave alone, it has more room to speak in our voices." Evan looked at the green studio door, at the peeling paint along its edge, at the lock that had to be lifted before it would close, a detail so small it hurt because it belonged to ordinary life. "I thought about sending it to you." Ben did not step back, but the skin beside his eyes tightened. At least you're saying it out loud, Ben said. I thought if I sent it to you, my mother might be safe. Mara closed her eyes. Ben looked down at his hands. The room emptied in a cold way, though no one left it. The old heater coughed once and went quiet. The smell of chemicals from the dark room crept out from under the black curtain, sour and damp, like a memory not washed clean. People always put themselves at the center of the story, Ben said very softly. You do it with guilt. I do it with sacrifice. Mara opened her eyes. Both of those make this sequence stronger. Evan stood between them, feeling as if his ribs had been opened with no blood, only cold wind passing through the spaces. He wanted to object, wanted to say no, wanted to choose a moral posture beautiful enough to stand inside, but every posture cast a shadow. Guilt, sacrifice, protection, truth. Those words were lovely while they still rested on the tongue. But in this room, under grey light and the smell of chemicals, they began to show thorns, chains, the cold metal people, usually hid with gentle voices. Mara turned back to the whiteboard and drew 3 columns. Legal, ethical, sequence. We need to know what it actually wants, she said. Ben laughed wearily. I thought it already said. A receiver who trusts Evan, Mara said. But it also needs a blind spot. Evan looked at the words blind spot on the board. The marker strokes heavy and black. What is the blind spot? Mara did not answer right away. She looked at him the way she used to look at an underexposed photograph. Not brightening it too quickly. Not concluding too soon. Only letting her eyes endure the darkness for a few more seconds. Not the place a camera cannot see, she said. The place the viewer does not want to look. Ben sat down slowly. Evan felt the sentence touch the exact place where the black car had once sat at the edge of the frame. Mara took the marker and wrote one name beneath the 3 columns. Vance Pruitt. Evan looked at the name, and the taste of rust rose again in his throat. Outside the studio window, rain began to fall, very lightly, only enough to blur the glass. In the reflection, the 3 of them stood side by side, slightly distorted by water, and behind Mara's shoulder, where the darkroom curtain should have been only a black patch, a thin curve appeared and disappeared, like the corner of a mouth that had just learned another name. They tried Vance Pruitt first. Before calling him, the 3 of them argued for nearly 20 minutes inside the studio that smelled of photochemicals, wet coats, and day-old coffee. Ben wanted to go to the police first. Though the evidence was still warped like badly compressed images, Mara wanted to find Clara first. Because truth owed the injured before it owed any institution, and Evan wanted to find Pruitt. Not because reason had lit his path, but because hatred gave him a direction more comfortable than guilt. Sharper, hotter, like holding a rod of heated iron, instead of sitting still while dry ice crawled vertebra by vertebra down his spine. On the whiteboard, Mara drew 3 columns. Legal, ethical, sequence. No option aligned with all 3. This is exactly what it wants, Ben said, his voice hoarse with lack of sleep. Arms crossed over his chest as if trying to keep the pieces of his body from falling out of an invisible frame. Maybe, Evan replied, eyes still stuck to the name Vance Pruitt, like they had stuck to a black slick of oil on water. But if this thing feeds on hidden guilt, Pruitt should burn brighter than any of us. Mara looked at him. You still think deserved means something. She did not raise her voice. But Evan felt his collar tighten. There was a moral seduction in the thought, a poisonous beauty like honey mixed with metal. If anyone deserved to receive the file, it must be the man who had bought Evan's silence, the man who used money to make a car vanish from the edge of a photograph and let someone else be convicted instead of the truth. Sending the sequence to Pruitt would let Evan call revenge justice, would give him an excuse bright enough not to look at the mud under his own heel. But the rule had said a stranger did not count. The person he hated was not bright enough. Pruitt did not trust Evan. He had only bought him. Still, they called. Evan sent an email to an old Pruitt consulting address, each word making his fingertips cold and numb, as if touching the edge of a blade left in the freezer. I still have an unfinished version of the accident material. Someone is asking questions. He did not send the original file, only a crop from the left edge, where after brightening, the clone pattern on the road began to show like a stitch in the wrong color of skin. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Then the phone rang. The man's voice on the other end was older, but still smooth, still calm, in a way that made the listener uncomfortable. Evan remembered that voice from the high-rise apartment 3 years earlier. Remembered the white shirt, the expensive watch, the thick envelope placed on the table. Remembered the way Pruitt spoke, as if a threat, paced correctly, became advice. "Mr. Cole?" Evan's stomach remembered the envelope before his mind fully remembered the man's face. Ben moved the recorder closer to the phone. Mara nodded very slightly, a gesture small as a needlepoint. "Breathe, speak, do not let him frame this." "You kept something?" Pruitt asked. Evan tightened his grip on the phone, enough to know I shouldn't have erased it. A pause, then a soft laugh. "Do you need money?" 3 years, a woman dead, a family broken, a man convicted, and Pruitt's first reflex was still to ask the price. "No." "Then what do you need?" "The truth." The laugh became clearer. "You edit photographs for a living, Mr. Cole. Be careful with large words. If you have a file, send it. We'll talk. You believe I have something useful?" "I believe you're not stupid enough to call me empty-handed." On the laptop, among the open log windows, a status line appeared and vanished. It was so quick that if Evan's eyes had not been trained to catch tiny irregularities like dust in the eye, he might have missed it. Trust, partial, blind spot, insufficient. Mara saw it too. Ben might not have, because he was focused on recording the call. That uncertainty chilled Evan more, like a hawk passing overhead, while only 2 people in the room could hear the wings. Perhaps the most dangerous people did not need blind spots. Or perhaps their blind spot was that they did not see others as human. Pruitt was too slick. There was nothing to brighten, no moral shadow layer waiting to be restored. His rot was already visible in the structure of his life, only polished, dressed in a suit, placed beneath conference lighting, and called strategic communication. "Mr. Cole?" Pruitt said. Evan hung up. Mara went to the whiteboard and crossed out client. Remaining: Ben, Mara, mother, self. The list made the studio go cold. Mother was a word Evan could not look at directly. Mara wrote it anyway. Self was the word Ben stared at for too long. No one said what all 3 now understood. If the image sequence could not use Pruitt, it would not therefore become merciful. It would move inward, choose someone whose pain Evan could imagine clearly enough to betray in the name of ending everything. Mara underlined self, then did not explain. Evan hated that she trusted him enough to understand. He looked at Ben's name. A phrase appeared in his mind before he could stop it. Witness by silence. Ben had not erased the car, but Ben had known. Ben had told Evan to delete the original file because keeping it would destroy him. Ben had protected Evan from going mad, and in doing so helped a lie continue living. That was a blind spot. The portion of truth that love refused to look at because looking would hurt the person loved. Ben's blind spot was not ignorance. It was tenderness arranged wrong. Ben had seen enough to know Evan might have done something wrong. He had also seen Evan collapsed on the dirty carpet, drunk, shaking, asking whether a blurry car could ruin his life. Ben had chosen the person in front of him over the strangers on the news. That was very human, very loyal, and wrong. The image sequence had not invented that wrongness. It had only lit it from below. They had to stop treating the sequence's rules as if they were ethics. It was mechanism. It did not choose the worst person. It chose the person whom love, friendship, gratitude, and debt could turn into a tool. It did not need Evan to be cruel. It only needed him afraid enough. self-pitying enough, desperate enough to believe betrayal could be explained later. Mara found the accident article again. The victim was Linda Hall, 48, a woman who sold flowers and breakfast sandwiches from a cart near the hospital entrance. That detail should not have mattered more than any other detail, but it did, because it made her impossible to keep as a clean legal concept in Evan's head. He read that she had been saving to move closer to her sister. He read that she called customers honey, even when they were rude. He read that Marco Rivera, the rideshare driver convicted in the case, had 2 children and an old speeding ticket the prosecutor had used to shape him into the kind of person a jury could blame quickly. Every article was a photograph Evan had helped crop. Linda Hall had a daughter, Clara. She had been 19 then, photographed in front of a small funeral home, both hands holding an old picture of her mother. In the image, her eyes were swollen, fingers clenched around a cheap wooden frame. No ghost stood behind her, no black figure, no impossible timestamp, only grief, old flowers, a black dress, and the flat light of places where the living must stand still to prove the dead had once existed. It was harder to look at than any shadow. The phone number in the old article no longer worked. Mara searched social media, local market groups, and finally found Clara Hall working at a small photo printing shop. The irony chilled Evan from the bones of his hands out to the nails. The truth he had erased had drifted towards someone who now lived by printing memories for other people to keep. The shop sat on a side street under a sign. Photo prints, passports, scanning. Inside, fluorescent light flattened everything. A woman in her early 20s was cutting passport photos with a box cutter. When the 3 of them entered, she looked up. The resemblance to the news photograph was not obvious at once, not until she stopped moving. Then the shape of her eyes appeared, older than her age, watchful in the way grief taught a face to stand guard. A small silver chain lay at her throat. On the counter sat a mug that read "World's Okayest Employee." The joke made Evan want to turn and leave. The printer behind her hummed evenly, feeding out 6 glossy rectangles of a laughing child, each one identical, each preparing to be sent to relatives, taped to a fridge, placed on a desk, keeping the child safe by being looked at again and again. The shop smelled of toner, warm paper, and plastic sleeves for school photos. Enlarged wedding samples, graduation cards, baby pictures, memorial collages lined the counter. A rotating rack displayed cheap frames with fake families smiling behind stock glass. Evan felt nauseated by the innocence of the place. This was where people came to preserve versions of life that could survive drawers, moves, funerals. Clara Hall worked beneath that light every day, cutting people's faces to regulation size, printing birthdays, passports, proof that people had stood somewhere and been loved. Massa stepped forward. "Are you Clara Hall?" The blade stopped. Clara's expression changed very little, but enough to make the room colder. "I don't talk to reporters anymore. We're not reporters," Mara said. Evan stepped forward, because there was no clean way to do this. "We need to talk about the accident that killed your mother 3 years ago." Clara looked at him, not angry right away, empty for 1 second, as if her mind needed time to understand that a sentence could ruin an ordinary afternoon. Evan did not tell her about the curse. He did not mention 3 days, did not use his fear to beg for sympathy. He placed 2 prints on the counter, the version he had delivered 3 years ago, and a recent reconstruction in which the blurred shadow of the black car returned to the left edge. He explained each edit step in a voice dry as a technical report. Underexposure, left edge, object removal, clone pattern, original file lost, traces of manipulation. He kept his eyes on the print because looking at Clara now would be making her carry his remorse. He pointed to the repeated texture of the road, the curb that joined too seamlessly, the grain that did not match the neighboring shadow. He used the language of evidence, because emotion would have been another theft. Clara deserved a truth clean enough to hate. Mara stood behind him, silent. Ben stood near the door, as if waiting for someone to come in and stop them. Customers still came and went while Evan dismantled the lie. A man picking up baby shower cards, a teenage girl printing a college form, an old woman asking the price for scanning old photographs. The world continued doing ordinary business with images while an old edit began to bleed. "I was paid to erase that car," Evan said. "I knew it could matter. I did it anyway." Clara listened, then she set down her phone. "How much?" Evan's throat closed. "How much did they pay you?" $5,000. Clara nodded once. "My mother died." "You cost $5,000. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Evan felt the weight of the sentence, precisely because Clara did not spend it on shouting. $5,000 had once seemed large enough to silence him. Now, in her voice, it became disgustingly small, a number with lint clinging to its edge. A few months of rent, equipment, debt, food, a little survival purchased with someone else's permanent absence. Ben turned his face away. Mara did not. Clara looked at Evan, and he understood that being seen by a living person was more frightening than any black shape in a frame. He had no excuse. Good. An excuse would have been another edit. "I have emails, payment logs, notes about the edit file, and the client's name," Evan said. "It may not overturn anything today, but it can start." He handed her a USB drive. Clara took it the way one accepts something dirty. She wrapped it in a paper receipt before placing it beside the register, as if the plastic could soil her fingers. Evan did not blame her. He wanted her to throw it in his face. He wanted punishment to have a shape he understood. Instead, she gave him something harder: the possibility of leaving without forgiveness. "If this is another game," Clara said, "I'll make sure everyone knows your name." "It isn't. You don't get to decide what this is anymore." Clara's hand trembled, but her voice remained calm. "Do you still have the original file?" "No." "Why?" "I deleted it. Because you were afraid?" "Yes." "Because your friend told you to?" Ben closed his eyes. Evan said, "Because I wanted a reason." Clara looked at Ben. "You're a good friend." Ben flinched slightly. "I don't mean that as a compliment," Clara said. Mara gave Clara a business card. "If you need a lawyer or press contacts, I know a few people. I won't promise an outcome, but I'll help." Clara accepted it without thanks. That was right. No one had the right to demand gratitude from someone they had harmed simply because they had finally told the truth too late. Outside the shop, Evan's phone lit up with a new status. Frame 3. Blind spot completed. No one said anything for several seconds. Thin rain fell through the streetlights, pulling silver threads across the Photoshop glass. Evan saw his reflection among the fake frames. A gray-faced man with hollow eyes and folded shoulders, standing among faces printed so people could remember. He did not know whether he had just been saved or skinned. Maybe both. Back at the studio, Mara turned on the camera. Not to film the curse, to film testimony. Ben sat before the lens first. He had objected, then sat down, because by the third objection, fear only looked like principle. A small light sat off to the left, falling on Ben's face in a way that made clear the dark circles, the peeled skin beside his index finger, the red mark on his wrist, where he had bitten himself while waiting. Mara did not adjust the light to flatter him. No one asked Ben if he was ready. Ready was a luxury for people not standing in the frame. Ben swallowed. "If this recording is used," he said, "use my name. If there are consequences, I accept my part. Evan doesn't get to protect me from the truth this time." Evan said nothing. He had wanted Ben safe, because that was the story in which he still possessed one decent instinct. Ben had just refused that role. That was the blind spot. Not lack of sight, a choice of sight. The selected crop. Mara let the camera continue after Ben finished. The silence became part of the testimony. Evan used to hate dead air in recordings, used to cut pauses, until people sounded cleaner, smarter, less afraid. Now the silence did the only honest work in the room. It showed Ben looking at the floor, searching for the shape of his own excuse, choice of sight. All three of them had practiced it differently. Evan chose pixels, Ben chose loyalty. Mara chose the distance after the breakup, chose not to pursue what she had suspected, because she did not want Evan's truth to become her responsibility. No one in the studio stood outside the frame. When Evan spoke, frame 4 slowly filled in. No one opened a file. The image sequence no longer needed a click. It recorded action. Approach, fake message. Trust. Ben stayed. Blind spot. The silence exposed before Clara. Recognition. Admitting what that silence had protected. When Evan finished, the laptop lit up by itself. It displayed a photograph of him sitting before the camera, Ben standing behind him, Mara outside the frame. The black shadow stood between the two men. One hand on Evan's shoulder, one on Ben's. But the most frightening thing was not the shadow. The most frightening thing was that in the photograph, both Evan and Ben were looking straight into the lens. Underneath, the status updated. Recognition completed. Frame 5. Forward pending. A countdown appeared. 23 hours, 59 minutes and 59 seconds. 1 day left. The third morning had no clear dawn. Low clouds pressed grey light down into the studio. They slept in shifts and slept badly. Mara on the old sofa beneath a wool coat. Ben in a chair with his arms crossed, jolting at phone vibrations that did not exist. Evan not sleeping so much as losing small pieces of time, and every time he opened his eyes, the countdown had changed, and those numbers became the weather hanging over every sentence. Coffee tasted metallic. The studio smelled of wet coats, chemical trays, fierce sweat, and an overheated laptop. Outside, Fremont went about its day. Cyclists in reflective jackets, office workers with laptop bags, a dog that absolutely refused to step in the rain. Inside, every ordinary sound could be a notification. The countdown sat on the laptop. It made no sound, but all three heard it in their stomachs. 16 hours 42 minutes and 11 seconds. Frame 5. Forward pending. No one wanted to look at it. Turning it off did not erase it. They had learned that. "What if I make Pruitt trust me?" Evan asked. "We tried," Ben said. "Not enough." Mara looked at him. "You sound like you're planning with a client, not escaping a trap. He deserves it most." "That's revenge speaking in the voice of justice. He caused this." "No," Mara said. "He bought you. You decided you could be bought." The sentence pulled all the air out of the room. Still, Evan wanted to meet Pruitt, not to win, to see whether he had any crack. They found Pruitt at a business conference in a downtown hotel, where his company was a sponsor. Late afternoon. Expensive perfume, red carpet swallowing footsteps, logos lit so cleanly they looked as if they had never touched mud. Ben carried a recorder in his pocket. Mara carried the analog camera. Evan wore a shirt Ben had lent him, the collar stiff enough to cut his breath. The conference was titled Resilient Cities, Responsible Futures. Pruitt's logo appeared beside words like transparency, community responsibility, social impact. At the registration table sat a bowl of paper-wrapped mints. A backdrop had been set up, so attendees could take photographs with name tags tilted at the right angle. Evan watched people smile for images they would post with captions about leadership. He felt like a stain walking through an advertisement. Every surface was designed to reflect status without reflecting mud. Polished marble, brushed steel, glass elevators, fresh flowers replaced before they could wilt. This was Pruitt's real photo editing software, not Photoshop. Architecture, money, proximity to power, and the ability to make consequences wait outside the banquet room. Vance Pruitt did not look like a monster. That was the problem. He was around 50, hair neat, smile warm enough not to look fake. When he saw Evan, recognition passed through his eyes for half a second. "Ah," Pruitt said, "the designer. I'm here because of Linda Hall. "I remember, good work." Pruitt smiled. "You were very clean." Mara took a photograph. Flash. In that white instant, no black shadow stood behind Pruitt. Only a man in a suit, a glass of wine, a sponsor badge, hotel lighting too clean to accuse anyone. Real life protected monsters with ordinary things. Pruitt leaned closer. "You should do what you believe is right." But right, provable, and surviving it are three different things. That sentence contained the whole architecture of his world. Right was decoration. Provable was negotiable. Surviving belonged to those with enough money for lawyers. Pruitt did not need to deny the truth. He only had to price the road from truth to consequence until exhausted people turned back. Evan understood with sudden clarity why Pruitt did not register as a receiver. The sequence needed a blind spot, a contradiction hidden between self-image and action. Pruitt had no such contradiction. He knew exactly what he was. He had only built a life in which that knowledge did not keep him awake. The realization passed through Evan like cold metal. He saw that he had once believed the same thing, in a smaller, cheaper, more cowardly version. Pruitt was what Evan could become with a glass office, private lawyers, and the ability to sleep. Evan's cracked phone lit up. Frame 5 requires removal of source layer. Ben read it. No. Mara snatched the phone from Evan's hand. "Don't let it use your professional language to turn a real-life action into a technical operation." Evan looked at her. Mara spoke each word very slowly. "Source layer is not a person. A person is not a layer." But Pruitt's voice kept ringing in his head. "Truth is a product, and whoever distributes it better wins." Somewhere deep inside Evan, the dirtiest part of him whispered that if an object disrupted the composition, a photo editor always knew what to do. That night, Evan left alone. Not like a hero, like a thief. Soft steps, shallow breath, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his damp jacket, thumbnail bitten raw again. He left no note. He waited until Ben and Mara were speaking tensely with a lawyer on the phone, took his coat, then slipped down the studio's back stairs. Rain fell lightly. The city was bright, but every light had a rim of noise. Seattle looked like a file compressed too many times. Jagged signs, flattened faces, shadows bleeding together. He turned off the network. The phone still showed him pictures like directions, not a map, thumbnails, a parking garage, a glass elevator, a grey door, Pruitt's license plate. Each image appeared on the lock screen and disappeared, leading him like a storyboard. In the hotel's underground parking garage, fluorescent lights shivered over wet concrete. The air smelled of gasoline, hot rubber, cheap floor cleaner. Cars were parked in rows, windshields black as dead screens. Pruitt stood beside a black sedan, talking on the phone, pale blue shirt. Stomach a little heavy, gold watch too large for his wrist. The parking garage had the acoustics of a place built accidentally for secrets. Every footstep returned from 3 directions. Ducks ran along the ceiling. Security cameras watched the entrance, but not the spaces between pillars. Evan understood at once why the thumbnails had led him there. This was the practical blind spot of an expensive building. The kind of gap no one noticed until after something happened. The phone vibrated in his pocket. Short pulses not enough to be a call. Directions through discomfort. He did not need to look to know the next thumbnail would be Pruitt's car. When Pruitt saw Evan, he did not look surprised. "You followed me. You're afraid," Evan said. Pruitt ended the call. "Of you?" "Of the recording. The emails." Clara Hall. Pruitt stepped closer. "You want to wash yourself clean with a ghost story. Sad." Evan's hand closed around something cold in his pocket. He did not remember picking it up. Maybe a piece of metal scraper. Maybe the broken box cutter from Mara's studio. The garage lights stretched into white bars overhead. Pruitt's face drew closer. Ben's footsteps echoed from far away. Mara called his name. The cold object gave his fear a handle. It was the most dangerous relief he had ever felt. For 3 days, the sequence had been abstract: files, layers, messages, darkness. Now a simple shape fit neatly into his palm, promising the vulgar clarity of action. He could do something. He could make a person stop talking. He could turn a moral disaster back into a physical problem. The thought did not arrive as rage. It arrived as photo editing. Remove the disruptive element. Clean the composition. Deliver the final. Everything separated into frames. Pruitt leaned in. Ben seized Evan's wrist. Mara shouted, "A person is not a layer." The phone fell to the concrete, cracking another line across its glass. The black shadow stood closer to Evan's shoulder than ever before, but it did not touch Pruitt. It touched Evan's hand. For 1 second, Evan understood the final frame exactly the way the sequence wanted him to. Remove source layer. Delete Pruitt. Clean the composition. Ben's hand squeezed hard enough to hurt. Mara's voice broke through the garage echo. "Evan, if you do this, it gets the exact story it wants." Pruitt stood a few steps away, his smile gone for the first time. Not because of the shadow. He feared scandal, witnesses, cameras, a guilty man no longer easy to control. A very human fear, low and real. Evan opened his hand. The metal object fell to the concrete. The phone lit up with a new instruction. Frame 5. Actual world capture required. Then another line. Frame 5 revised. Mara picked up the phone. It changed. Ben still did not let go of Evan's wrist. "What does it want now?" Evan asked. The screen answered, "Forward does not require a receiver. Forward requires refusal to transfer debt." They returned to the studio near midnight. Ben did not let go of Evan until the door locked behind them. His hand was hot and damp around Evan's wrist, tight enough to leave a red ring. Mara placed the prints, recordings, emails, and videos into a waterproof folder. No one spoke in the car except to give directions. Ben drove because Evan's hands would not stop jerking. Mara sat in the back seat, both hands flattening the evidence folder. The city slid past in wet fragments: traffic lights, pharmacy signs, the blue light inside buses, apartment windows stacked like lives Evan would never enter. At a red light, Ben said, "I wanted to hit him too." Mara looked at him in the rearview mirror. Ben kept his eyes on the road. "Doesn't make it right," he added. "No," Mara replied. "It is evidence. No one talked about going to the police that very second. Not because it was unnecessary, because one more administrative sentence might have broken Evan before the final act." The countdown on the laptop read 2 hours, 3 minutes and 17 seconds. The circle had closed. That number no longer belonged to the first job. It had become a signature, a loop, a timestamp, pretending to be an address. Evan made a file not meant to frighten someone who trusted him and push the curse away, but to become evidence, ugly, incomplete, public, unusable as a private escape. The file resisted beauty. Every time Evan arranged things too neatly, he heard Mara standing behind him in silence, and her silence was worse than criticism. He left the edges uneven, left the pauses in the testimony, left Ben's voice shaking, left the moment Clara turned away, left the dead space before he said $5,000. He did not color grade the garage footage, did not clean the hiss, did not sharpen Pruitt's face into a villain. Evidence did not need to satisfy. It needed to survive other people's hands. For the first time, his skill was not used to hide roughness. It was used to preserve it. He did not send it to Ben, did not send it to his mother, did not attach it to a stranger's email, did not choose Clara as a moral exit, did not transfer the debt. He placed witness.edit into the evidence folder and left it there. Leaving it there was harder than sending it. Sending would have felt like completion, like a gesture large enough to wash him clean. Leaving it meant accepting that this file was not a ritual of escape. It was a beginning for other people to use, challenge, doubt, copy, misunderstand, and perhaps ignore. Truth in the real world did not move with supernatural certainty. It passed into law officers' inboxes, Newsroom meetings, family arguments, procedures, delays, cold rooms, where people decided which pane had enough paperwork. It could still fail. That uncertainty was the first honest thing Evan had made in years. Clara did not call Evan, did not thank him. At 8:14 the next morning, Mara received a message from the number she had saved as Clara Hall. No greeting. No forgiveness folded into polite language. Only a short paragraph, written with the control of someone who had spent years learning not to shake in public. I sent the file to 3 reporters, a lawyer, and the Innocence Project office that ignored us the first time. If your story is true, it no longer belongs to Evan. If it isn't true, it still belongs to my mother. Either way, I'm done letting men decide which part of the photograph matters. Mara read it twice. Then she turned the phone so Evan and Ben could see. Ben lowered his eyes. Evan did not. He made himself keep looking at the message until the words stopped resembling punishment and began resembling ownership, returning to someone who had been robbed. Clara did not accept his confession as a gift. She took the evidence out of his hands. Good, Evan thought, though the thought hurt. For 3 days, he had feared being turned into an object in someone else's photograph. Clara had shown him an older truth. Her mother had been turned into an object in his photograph long ago. A shape at the edge of the frame. A case number. A payment line worth $5,000. Clara did not forgive him. She did something stronger. She carried the story to a place where he could no longer edit it. The countdown reached 17 seconds, then stopped. There was no explosion. No hand pulled him into the screen. Only a small sensation behind Evan's eyes, as if someone had placed hot sand under his lids. Ben set the recorder down. Evan? Evan turned. Ben's face broke into pixel squares. The effect lasted less than a second, or forever. Evan did not know. Ben's features separated into compression blocks. Forehead, eyes, cheeks, mouth. Each block slightly misaligned. Each block carrying a different emotion. Worry in one, anger in another, exhaustion in a third. Evan blinked, and Ben's face returned. Human, real, afraid. What did you see? Ben asked. Evan opened his mouth, then closed it. He had spent too long naming what other people should see. Now he did not trust himself enough to caption this. On the laptop, a small status line appeared. Flatten image. Unavailable. After the 3rd night, no one could call it lack of sleep anymore. Ben had a backup that could not have been made by hand. Mara had a print from a printer that had not been plugged in. Clara had recordings, emails, and timestamps, arriving in the wrong order. The evidence was too real to be rescued by a clean medical label. But the hospital still asked Evan whether he heard voices. They asked very gently, and the gentleness made the question more unpleasant. A nurse with a soft ponytail. A resident doctor in clean shoes. A social worker whose ID photo had been retouched so much that the real woman looked like her own exhausted relative. Evan understood their caution. A man talking about files appearing on offline machines and darkness obeying. Trust sounded like exactly the kind of person hospitals were built to handle. He wanted to give them the evidence folder. He also wanted to protect the evidence from being turned into symptoms. Both desires were reasonable. That frightened him more than either one alone. He shook his head. They asked whether he saw things that were not there. Evan looked at the nurse's face. Around her eyes, the fluorescent light had smoothed the skin into a mask. In the reflection on her name badge, the room behind him had a dark corner that did not match the room's actual geometry. No, he said. The doctor wrote something down. Sleep deprivation. Possible psychotic features. He did not resent the words. From the other side of the doctor's glass, they might even be true. A person could be cursed and also disordered by too many sleepless nights. A file could be impossible and still produce anxiety symptoms. Reality did not owe him a single genre. What frightened him was not being disbelieved, It was being translated into a language where the most important part of the photograph became an artifact. They kept him for observation. The phrase sounded kind. It was not. Observation was what cameras did. Observation was how people pretended they had not intervened. That afternoon, Mara visited. She set a folder before him. Testimonies, copies of emails, technical notes, transaction lists, photographs of Pruitt, the garage recording. Clara has a lawyer, she said. Ben sent backups. I gave part of it to a reporter. Pruitt? Normal. Evan nodded. Normal was more frightening than day zero. Out there, Pruitt still had lawyers, money, handshakes, conferences, annual reports. The image sequence seemed unable to touch him because he had no blind spot in the ordinary human sense. He did not hide guilt from himself. He hid it from others. That was the talent of adult demons. They did not need to deceive themselves. Your mother called, Mara said. Evan looked down. I told her you were sick, not the rest. Thank you. You should call her. I know. Mara waited. She had never been cruel enough to fill a silence for him. What happened to Nina Hart? Evan asked. Mara took a printed cash page from her bag. Missing. No body found. Final post says she understood what the blind spot was. After that, someone used her account to review M05 restoration. So it still moves. Maybe. Evan looked at his hands. Sometimes his fingers curled into shortcuts by themselves. Thumb and index finger searching for Control-Z in empty air. Every time a face passed the hospital door, every time a voice revealed a hidden layer, his hand jerked, wanting undo. Undo the erased car. Undo the unanswered message to his mother. Undo the second he weighed Ben as a receiver. Undo the moment in the garage when he wanted to delete Pruitt from real life. The nurses saw the movement. They called it anxiety. Evan let them. Anxiety was not wrong. It was only not enough. His body had learned the grammar of his profession and would not stop speaking it. Select, fix, undo, hide, export, repeat. When his mother called, he answered on the third ring. Her voice was smaller than he remembered and more irritated than he deserved. She asked why Mara had answered his phone. Asked whether he was eating. Asked whether bills had scared him. Evan said yes to the last one. Though she meant the pharmacy bills and he meant everything. But life had no history panel, no previous step to return to, no clean backup. Mara saw his fingers twitch. Still trying to undo. Always. That's not punishment. That's habit. What's the difference? Punishment is something that happens to you. Habit is something you keep doing. He wanted to hate that sentence. He was too tired. 2 weeks later, Evan returned to the apartment. The landlord had not changed the locks. Ben had paid the rent and lied very badly that the payment system had probably glitched. Evan let the lie stand, because some kindness should not be edited into an explanation while someone was still holding it out. The apartment had the stale smell of a life paused incorrectly. The noodle cup was gone. Ben must have thrown it out. The ashtray had been emptied. Someone had opened the window, and the air smelled of rain passing through the room without purifying anything. Evan stood at the threshold and felt an irrational tenderness for that ruined place. It had witnessed him without understanding. In some way, that was also mercy. On the desk sat a paper bag from the convenience store, instant soup, nicotine patches, a cheap notebook, and a note in Ben's square handwriting. Eat before coffee, dumbass. The Pi C was unplugged. The webcam was gone. The monitor glass was black. In it, Evan saw himself as a broken reflection. The son who had not called. The friend who had used another person's loyalty. The lover who had lied. The photo editor who had taken money. The witness still alive. The patient who now saw masks everywhere. He sat down on the bed. The old phone rang. Not the cracked smartphone he had carried through the sequence. That one was powered off inside Mara's evidence bag. This was the old backup phone Ben had found in a drawer. Reset. Wiped. Able only to call and text. A stupid object, they had joked. A phone too dumb to be haunted. The joke had not aged well when it began to ring. Unknown number. He almost did not answer, but the ringtone repeated, cold and regular, like the clicks from the first night. He picked up without speaking. On the other end, a young voice trembled. "Is this Evan Cole? I saw your warning post. I haven't sent the file to anyone. I just need to ask. If I open the image but haven't lifted the shadows yet, am I still safe?" The warning post had been Mara's idea and Clara's condition. Clara had refused the dramatic confession video, refused statements of redemption, refused Evan's first draft because it sounded too much like a man explaining himself. "No drama," she wrote. "No cursed image game. Just a warning." The final post went up under Evan's name, with Clara's wording intact. "If you receive a restoration job from M05 Restoration, do not download the file. If you have downloaded it, do not open it. If you have opened it, do not adjust exposure. Do not forward private images. Document everything offline. Contact someone before you are asked to choose a receiver." The post was mocked within an hour. It was also saved, copied, archived, translated into the anxious language of forums where people laughed until one detail sounded too familiar. Evan closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, red, green, and blue pixels separated like flies. "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Call someone you trust. Turn off the screen. Do not look into the dark areas. Do not send the file. Do not believe any sentence that says you only need to brighten it a little more." He heard himself become instructions. That was how survival sometimes began. Not with salvation, but with a script someone else could use while panicking. He wished Nina Hart had left him more than a final apology. He wished he knew her voice, her exact warning, the mistake she had made in time to name it. All he had were fragments. He would give this stranger more than that. "Put me on speaker," he said. "Step away from the screen. Tell me what room you're in. Keep describing ordinary objects." On the other end, the young voice pulled in thin breaths. "There's a wooden desk, a glass of water, a yellow lamp, a jacket on a chair. Good, keep going. There's a framed photo on the shelf." Evan opened his eyes. In the dark screen in front of him, the reflection of his own room sat still. Nothing behind him. No black shadow. No smiling mouth. Only the paper bag, the cheap notebook, Ben's handwriting, and the window open to the rain. "Describe the frame," Evan said, his voice slowing, softening, not to reassure the other person with a false promise, but to keep them both standing in real life a little longer. "My mother is in the picture," the other person said. "She's smiling. I can't see it very well because the screen behind me is reflected in the glass." Evan felt the skin at the back of his neck turn cold, but he did not turn around. He knew some blind spots could not be erased by twisting one's neck. "Don't look at the reflection," he said. "Look at the glass of water. Describe it." The other person did. Outside the window, Seattle kept raining. On the desk, the cheap notebook opened in the wind, flipping to its first blank page. Evan took Ben's pen and set the tip to the paper. His hand still shook, but it no longer searched for a shortcut. He wrote, "If you have seen the darkness, do not make it clearer in order to save yourself. Turn on the light for someone else first." On the other end of the line, the young person began to cry, very quietly, trying to hold it back in their throat, as if even crying could be recorded into a file. Evan sat in the damp room, under the grey light of afternoon, phone pressed to his ear, one hand holding the pen, the other resting on the notebook. He did not know whether he could save the person on the line. He did not know whether the curse would end. He did not know whether Clara would win, whether Pruitt would pay, whether Marco Rivera would hear the name of the black car spoken in a courtroom. The truth could still jam in a printer, get lost in email, be blurred by lawyers, be called insufficiently clear. But this time he did not edit it to make it easier to look at. He stayed on the line. Outside, rain touched the window like static. Inside, A very small, very abnormal detail appeared without any sound. On the unplugged computer monitor, in the lower left corner of the dark glass, a yellow folder appeared in the reflection. Not on the desktop, not inside the machine, only in the glass. The folder's name was Day -1. Evans saw it. Then he looked down at the notebook, at the line still wet with ink, and did not touch the screen.